Okay, I think we're live now. So hello everybody and welcome to the A Song of Ice and Fire read along 2023, A Dance with Dragons spoiler discussion. And I'm very excited to have my three wonderful guests here. And I'll just go ahead and have them introduce themselves again and talk a little bit about their channels or where to find them. So starting up in the top left-hand corner with Joanna.
Okay, thank you. I'm Joanna from the channel Joanna Sews. I haven't been posting since the beginning of the year, to be honest. I'm trying to find what I want to do. But I read mostly fantasy. My favorite series of all time being this one. So I'm super happy to be here and to talk A Dance with Dragons with you all.
Wonderful.
Hi everybody, I'm Kyle from Read by Kyle. I also talk about fantasy and whatnot, and also have not really been posting. And honestly, all of us, Joanna's just bringing us all out of retirement. So thank you so much, Joanna.
My job.
If you don't know, this is my favorite series of all time as well. This is my, I think, sixth read of A Dance with Dragons, something around there. And yeah, it's still a book I love, even though of the series, it's the one I like the least, clearly, but that's still like I love the most.
Okay.
Still, right? So,
yep. Scott, the Bald Booktuber. I haven't posted since July, so I'm in good company. That's good. Song of Ice and Fire is my favorite series of all time. Usually on my channel, when I do post, I'm talking about either George or Robin Hobb, my two favorite authors. I think this is my fifth time. I think I'm slightly behind Kyle there. So, but yeah, in many things, as it were, we'll see if I can keep up with all his theories and everything today. So, see how it goes.
I'm heavily going to rely on Kyle and Scott. This is only my second time reading these books. So the first time was, I want to say 12 years ago now. I'm not going to do the math. I think it was like 12, 13 years ago now. And they held up. I was wondering if this reread would hold up with my memory because I loved all 5 books the first time I read them. Couldn't get enough. And then this time when I reread the books, I was so impressed how much I love them just as much. And there are so many things that you can catch on a reread with these books that is very special for reread purposes. And Joanna, this is her first time reading through at least books 4 and 5. Is that right? You had read books 1 through 3 before.
93% of book 5.
Yeah.
Thanks for selling me out, Kyle.
I was going to.
You know? I knew it was gonna happen. Yes, yeah, fairness, I didn't finish book 5 yet, but I will finish it tomorrow. It's fine. So we can talk about everything.
I mean, we have to tell people that you didn't finish, though, because if we were like, if you said something and then like the ending clearly contradicts that, people would think you just didn't read it properly.
This is true. So, this is true. You know? Yeah, I didn't think about that.
All right. So we're going to begin with some general thoughts about A Dance with Dragons, just things, maybe general things that you noticed. I do have some thoughts I want to just talk about generally, but I'll just go ahead and start the discussion. Maybe I'll go counterclockwise this time. So Scott, we'll start with you this time.
Yeah, I like a lot of what goes on here. I'm not as invested over in Marine and those kinds of things as maybe I'd like to be. So some of the stuff around where Danny is not maybe my favorite in the series, but I don't hate it. Like I'm not super invested in is Hisdar really the Harpy or not? That's just not my bag. But what I do like is all the Dorn stuff, and I wish there was more of it. I do like Doran Martell being kind of the grass that hides the viper. I think all that stuff is super cool. I do really enjoy all the White Harbor stuff we get because I think that's an area that could be better explored. I like the Manderleys. They're, they like food great. Like I do. And of course, we get some Davos there as well, which is great. Any Davos on page I am on board with, so that's great. And then I like all the stuff at the walls. So I am a big John fan, so I like all of his POV chapters. Those are probably my favorite. I actually forgot that we got some Melisandre point of view stuff. I simply had escaped my memory that we get things from her POV, which I really like as well. So a lot of really cool stuff in this book. Probably I think it's tied with Feast for Crows in terms of being kind of just a tiny bit of a lower tier.
How dare you? I thought we were friends.
I love them both. Both are just below the other three for me, but much, much better than much of the fantasy I read, and I read a ton of fantasies. So,
Yeah.
even the ones I don't like as much, I love more than most fantasy books I read. So it says a lot for the series. So that's what I took out of it.
Yeah, fantastic. And what about you, Kyle? Any sort of broader things you noticed on this reread?
Probably once we get into it a little. I will say, like, I I always go into A Dance with Dragons a little hesitant because, like, the ending just makes me so mad because this book does not end. Like, it does not have an ending. It just is like, I'm out of pages. We're just gonna drift off and let Jesus take the wheel. And I understand why he had to do that, and I just wish that he hadn't. But other than that, what's actually in the book, like, I mean, I think it's all pretty excellent. I have some minor problems, but basically all the things that Scott said, except that I also really like the. I want to know who the Harpy is because one of the things I like so much about like Westeros or Planetos, I guess it would be, is just how deep everything feels, and like
Mhm.
you have all these like little one-off. You get like Arya and Bravos, and she's just like building out Bravos for you, and then like yeah, I have much less investment in Marine and Slaver's Bay, but it still helps the whole world feel deeper.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, I'm always like, well, okay, well, like how many of these people are actually plotting against Daenerys? Because I find just the idea of like some of them want a different monarch and some of them obviously are just really, really against it. And that's like how, real life works too, with like if
Sure.
there's a regime change. So I feel like it's really interesting in that way. I think George handicapped himself a little bit by just making everybody like, and I'm like, how do you say this name, George? I have no idea. But other than that, it's good. But yeah, no, I really love the Theon stuff in this book. I think he is this is some of George's best writing in the Theon chapters. And basically everything in the north is just chef's kiss for me.
Yes, fantastic. And what about you, Joanna?
I was going to add the Theon stuff because Scott, you hadn't mentioned it, and I was surprised about how much I loved following his chapters, especially really how you start with the first, like I think the first chapter of his is called Reek, and then the last chapter is called Theon, and I was just like, yes, I'm so happy. And like his last sentence is, "You got to remember your name. My name's Theon. You got to remember your name." And I was like, oh, I didn't.
He's the only person in this book that has an arc, like a full
I love
arc.
it.
Yeah.
I never expected to feel so emotional about Theon. Honestly, I was just wow, and I loved it. I loved the Arya chapters so much. I love seeing her in Bravos, and of course, I am always interested in Dany because she's my favorite. However, it's just to me, it's just so heartbreaking that Rhaegal and Viserion are like chained up, and then you see them in pain and suffering, and they want to be free, and it's just to me like, no, free the dragons, free the babies, they gotta grow,
Yeah.
And then, all the stuff at the wall to me is just, I love it so much. Like the Jon chapters were great.
I love it.
And I also enjoyed seeing the Cersei stuff because we had a version of Cersei in A Feast for Crows, and now you have a very different version of Cersei in a very tough situation, and I really liked seeing her in there, especially how she uses her lies and everything with those septas, and the septas like, sure, yeah, like they don't care. So I love this book as well a lot.
Yeah,
I would have mentioned Theon a little bit, but it gets a little torture porny for me at times.
we'll get into Theon in more depth because we're going to go into each of these characters in a little bit more depth. And I'm glad though that you brought up the dragons really quickly because I had the thought when I was reading
Ben,
Dany's
don't
chapters.
stick around.
Aw. we can't wait to hear your thoughts, Ben, when you finish the book.
Sure.
Yeah, so I just want to say really quickly though, with Daenerys' chapters, I did have the thought that, oh yeah, we will talk about that as well. Good, that's a fair point. I had the thought, were the dragons almost symbolic, the fact that they were chained and her power was kind of chained down by so many forces telling her this is how you have to be a leader. You have to have the fighting pits open. You have to have slavery again. You have to wear this tokar or whatever it was that she doesn't want to wear. You have to do this sort of thing for a marriage. Like all these decisions she doesn't want to have to make, and she's fighting it, and she's trying to be free, and she's trying to be an independent ruler, but there's just so much weight on her on how to rule. And then I think the bigger things that were just sticking out to me upon reread were how how George R.R. Martin decides to plot chapters, because I felt like I kept seeing a lot of parallels between what Danny's going through and what John's going through as leader, but in interesting ways, like in different ways, because with Danny, she's trying to abolish slavery and she's trying to create more independence with the people, and they're resisting it. Even the people who were slaves, formerly slaves, are not comfortable. They feel like they're in worse condition. Whereas with John, he's trying to gather forces with the wildlings, a free people who choose their own ruler. And he's trying to get together with Stannis. And Stannis thinks, oh, if I give the wildlings mercy and if I pardon them and if I give them shelter, then they'll acknowledge me as their king. And he's like, nope, it doesn't work like that with the wildlings. They choose their own king and they're free. They have their own mindset. So it's almost like the opposite, the slave mindset with what Dany is going through in Meereen versus the wildling mindset that Jon is having to go through. And both of them are in these very uncomfortable leadership positions.
Yeah.
So it was something that really stuck out to me. And then like other broader things, and we'll go into each of these characters in depth, was also like looking at the walk of shame with Cersei's chapter and kind of comparing that to Dany's last chapter and her walk, which is very undignified in many ways for a queen. And then the other one that stuck out to me was Asha's chapter, how she is just trying to put one foot in front of the other as she's making her way as a captive towards Winterfell. But and of course, yes, we have to talk about Theon. So many different character arcs that are fascinating, and it's interesting just to see these little seeds that George drops in to chapters. So like other things I noticed that were interesting too were like things like how in John's chapter, for example, he would say something like he was worried about the wildlings and how to feed all these people. He's like, what are they going to say when they have to survive on snow and acorn paste? When in another chapter, Bran is surviving on snow and acorn paste, or a chapter when Jon is saying like, oh, and I wish this great, this vision that Melisandre has of Arya coming in the distance. He's basically thinking, oh no, like I hope that Arya is actually I wish you were somewhere else. I wish you were in Bravos or in a free city.
Yeah.
In the next chapter, you're in Arya's chapter there.
In
So
Bravos.
it's really clever the way he does things. I know a lot of people talk about how he's not much of a plotter, but he's a good plotter, I think. I think he drops a lot of things along the way. Anyway, I've said a lot. So.
I think that's more like when they say, because he's famously a gardener, but like his plotting is obviously excellent. Like A Storm of Swords is like maybe the best plotted fantasy book of all time.
Yeah.
I do want to say though that I read not this reread, but the reread before. I did A Ball of Beasts, which is like an online PDF file you can find where they re-merge Feast for Crows and Dance with Dragons into one large book. Which for a reread I highly recommend, because first read, don't do that. It's the middle is like 500 pages of traveling and it's really bad. But on a reread, when you know where everything's going, you can just slow down and appreciate it. The thematic work that he's doing in these two books is like exceptional, and like exactly what Joanna was saying, where like Dany and Jon are juxtaposed. You also get the Cersei chapters, and the way they're intermingled, you really see that like the whole thing is a commentary on leadership. And Cersei's downfall compared with like Daenerys's kind of rocky situation in Meereen, paralleled with Jon at the north, like it's excellent. And I feel like there wasn't really a way for him to solve this issue, but it definitely harmed the overall thematic message of like having these characters all split up like this.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've heard about that format before where you can read them both at the same time and kind of get a different picture of the themes in that way. So that's really interesting. I might choose to do that on my third reread. Fantastic. I think I went through that one.
Cat, we don't have to bash.
Yeah, she's.
I want to say up top, this is my favorite prologue. Oh yes. Okay, so the prologue. Anyone want to talk about that? Because we have warging.
It's very.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So it is really good writing. Like, I mean, baseline Martin is always really good at writing, but it was all like, I find the warging one of the lesser interesting magics. So just for me, like it wasn't going to be my top favorite. But the first read, I always like talking to people about the prologue because it's just kind of like a short story that has nothing to do with anything, and then it really only gains context with John's last chapter.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you have John's last chapter, you can really think about why that was there and what the implications of it all could mean. And so putting those pieces together is really fun for me. But yeah, just like the very end of that chapter when Thistle comes back and like remembers him and kills him is pretty vivid.
Yeah. And we could just go ahead and say too that I guess the implication there is that maybe John isn't dead, that maybe he's working with
Well, John is
Snape,
confirmed to
with
not be dead,
Ghost.
but I do think he's working into Ghost is a popular theory.
He's confirmed it's not dead? Is that
Well,
really?
listen, as soon as the book came out, George did an interview like the second day. I vividly remember this. And the interview said, "So you killed John." This is the very beginning of the interview. And George R. R. Martin said, "Oh, you think he's dead, do you?" And the interviewer said, "Oh, well, it certainly seems that way." And then George was like, "Oh, interesting." So like for sure he's not dead. Like, come on.
Oh,
Like show or no show, he's not dead.
We don't know that he might not die and return.
True.
Yeah.
Okay, he might technically be dead, but like he's gonna be in the story more.
It's gonna be like a Robin Hobb parallel thing, I think.
Or it could be like Lady Stonehands, or it could be like Don Darien coming back. It could be many things.
Melisandre's there.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Which she's really silly, but we'll talk about that later.
She's really silly. I've never heard
She's
that.
so silly. I'm sorry. She's like, I'm praying for a vision of Azor Ahai, and all I see is snow. I'm like, well,
She's not reading a book series where she's following Jon Snow's POV. Like
it's capitalized with S. Come on, Melisandre, read your own chapters.
She does try to warn John about the daggers. She does try to,
she does.
warn him about his
chapter with
enemies.
her is really good.
Yeah.
Can we just talk? Let's go ahead and start with the Melisandre chapter. Let's start in the middle of the book. Why not?
It's really interesting because George didn't intend to have any more new prologues in Feast besides I think just John Connington was the original one, and then he had to kind of add more. And so Melisandre was not supposed to be a POV, and then he realized he kind of needed her as a POV to set up like the John stuff. But even not setting up the John stuff, it's really interesting to see just like actually she is on our side. Like, when people are going through the first time, like I hear a lot of people being like, "Oh, like she's crazy, she's sus, she's evil," all this kind of stuff. But when you actually get her perspective, like, I mean, burning people alive is like not good. I'm not pro burning people alive generally.
That's
hot take.
It's a good thing to know.
But like at least we know from her perspective that she is actually trying to help humanity and like fight these things, and like she actually believes what she's doing is for the greater good, which I think is good context.
Yeah. I was curious about her visions, by the way. Oh, go ahead, Scott.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say we get some backstory from her too, right? Because she remembers back to like being part of a slave auction, and I think there's a past name that she used, Melanie or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So we get a ton of context from her that we didn't know otherwise. Because was she one of them? I don't think she foresaw the Pale Mare, right? Or did she? I think
no, that was House of Undying. Yeah. Oh,
that
it
was in
Quaithe,
Dany's. Yeah. That was Dany's. The prophecy told to Dany.
No, I remembered that. I just didn't remember if she also saw it or not, and I don't think so. So.
Oh no, she saw the gray girl on the gray horse, and she also saw. I'm trying to see if I can find it. Shoot, I thought it was on her chapter.
3 Rangers dying.
Yeah, she did see that.
And Garth being sad that Garth died or something like that. One of the Rangers was clearly upset.
Yeah.
I would be too.
Oh, this was what I thought. Yeah, this was what was interesting to me. What she also saw is snowflakes swirled from a dark sky and ashes rose to meet them. The gray and the white whirling around each other as flaming arrows are, and then it goes on from there. But that specifically, that line, it made me think about the ash, the gray and the white whirling around each other. I don't know if I'm reading too much into this, but I keep on thinking of ash and I keep on thinking of grayscale.
What was the sentence about the rose?
Oh no, it's Ash's Rose.
Oh,
Yeah.
Rose, not
So
like the Rose. Because
snowflakes.
I'm like,
Oh,
oh,
Rose.
Liana. Okay, we're good.
Something is for sure going to pop off with Grayscale in the next book. We have
Yeah.
two really ominous things going on. First, we have obviously John Connington just being like, everything's fine. But just being a typical 40-year-old man about his illnesses, you know?
Mhm.
And then you have Shireen and Val's just like over the top reaction to it. So I feel like something has to happen there as well.
Yeah, for
Well,
sure.
we have Tyrion as well, plucking his fingers and seeing if he has grayscale as well. So
Yeah,
It doesn't
Tyrion
seem like
likely
he's
Tyrion doesn't
present.
seem like, I think he would have gotten it by now, but who knows?
Never
I
know.
guess.
I don't know how long it takes to
Yeah.
manifest. So
Yeah. 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 No, I just kept on thinking about that. I'm like, oh man, the ashes. And that's a really interesting visual for the series because it's like ice and fire, but then ashes, everything going gray. And I don't know. There's something really cool about that symbol to me.
And
And I
ashes
do
look so
think
much
about
like
that.
snow, right? Which we had in the show, in the House of the Undying Visions
Oh,
of Dany
yeah.
of the show, where everyone was like,
Mm.
oh, it's covered in snow. And in the end, it was ashes. So,
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah. Some interesting things happening there.
Just going back to the John thing, there was a chapter, I think it was a John chapter, where he was thinking or talking, and then he said, from man to wolf, back to being a man. And I was like, well, now. Well,
Oh,
now.
wow.
Is this foreshadowing, George?
I wonder.
I didn't even catch that. That's a really good catch.
I really liked it. I was like,
Let's go ahead and talk about John's arc, though.
Okay, John's dumb in this book.
Okay, but before we get there, let's just talk about where we start off with John too, because I think he's recalling Aegon's advice to him about kill the boy. That to be a man, you have to kill the boy. And at the same time, he's also recalling his own father's advice about how you can love your men, but you can't be a friend to them. And so he becomes pretty hard, pretty fast in this particular book. The way his form of leadership is much harsher than I think the people who voted him in thought it would be, including Sam. And it's interesting because I was just talking the other day with Jimmy for a Bend the Knee discussion on Catelyn's chapter in A Storm of Swords, and about how Rob Stark he makes some pretty tough decisions at the end with Karstark, and the way his language becomes a lot harsher, and you see the boy become the man in the more violent way, in the more harsh way. And I feel like you see a similar transformation with John in this particular book. What do you all think about that?
Yeah, I mean, we see him kind of go away from the friends that helped him along the way. Pip and Grin are, not really allies anymore. They're subordinate to him, and he's trying to, of course, get the free people over, which ultimately Bowen Marsh and Othel Yarwick and others are not thrilled with, which I understand their point for not being thrilled with. But I don't know that he's dumb in this book, but I am
he's
interested
dumb.
to hear Kyle's standpoint on that. I don't know that I would have chosen differently, I guess. I think trying to get the folks from Hardhome over to this side makes a lot of sense. The less bodies that the whites have to turn is probably a good thing. And you want to save as many people as you can. So I don't know that I would have chosen differently
I
as far
agree
as some
with
of
all
those
that.
decisions.
Yeah,
Okay,
I don't think
what's the dumb part?
Yeah,
sending all of his friends away and then just like clearly being Melisandre is like a gray girl on a dying horse, and then but then a gray girl on a dying horse with fleeing a marriage shows up, and he's like, but you didn't dot your I's and cross your T's. This is Alice Karstark. I'm like, I'm sorry, I give her points for this, man. Maybe you should listen to her. And then Ghost is freaking out.
That's fair.
Ghost has never attacked a black brother in the history of his entire life, and he starts snapping at Mully or whatever. And then John's like, seems sus. Must be the boar. Guess I'll just not listen to anybody. Can't be wrong.
Aww.
And like Bowen Marsh is just the dumbest, literally the dumbest, bureaucratic, nonsensical. This is the way we've always done it. Piece of shit.
Yeah.
And he just needed to be stripped from command. Just like, get out of my face. If you're gonna send him away, because he's not a leader, so nobody will follow him. He's not gonna get an uprising of
you need somebody to count the turnips and stuff. I don't know.
Get Wick. Wick seems like a follower. I don't know. I just like it's like he's so in one hand, John is really good at leadership, but at the other hand, he's really bad. And I just think part of it is him being young, but part of it is him being very my way or the highway. Like he does not try to convince people. And there's multiple times where he's having like a council meeting. And look, I'm sure it would be very frustrating to have all these people just naysaying all your ideas, but he doesn't even really try. He gets mad one time and he snaps at them. And he's like, what do you think? They're going to all be corpses and then we're going to have to fight them. But then you're just yelling at them. So they're not really going to listen. He never really tries to negotiate with them or to make them see why this is important or do anything to bring them on his side. He just gets exhausted with them and he'll just be like, okay, like we're done here. Thanks. And I'm like, you're already defeated. Like this is the battle that you aren't prepared for, is to make these people see what you need to get done. And on the other side of that, stop sending away everybody who likes you. Like literally somebody's like, hi, John, I like you. Great. Go to this castle over there.
There is some value to what you're saying. He wasn't expecting this position, right? So he wasn't ready for it. He had some seasoning because of how he was raised and because he spent time with the old bear, but this is not what he signed up for.
Yeah, he's extremely young. And I do really like John. Like, I mean, I'm kind of playing it up a little bit, but he's always I'm just like, can't you see what this is going to be like? Like, can't you see? Have you never heard of Julius Caesar, Jon Snow?
Probably not. What I had in this chapter was like, at some point also with Ghost when he's acting a bit, and I was like, didn't we learn anything from Rob? And I'm like, oh wait, you weren't there. Okay, granted,
he wasn't there.
Yeah.
So my question to you all is, when it comes to Jon Snow's arc, what do you all think about his decision with Karstark? Do you think that was betraying his oath at that point? Because
I don't think it was betraying his oath. Like you were talking about, like locking up Cregan, or are you saying telling?
Getting involved at all?
Anna.
I mean, he's getting involved.
No. So Alice came to the wall, so now she's a guest. So he's not doing anything wrong. Cregan came armed with men to attack. Which, I mean, he wasn't literally trying to attack the Night's Watch, but he came armed with intention of harming a guest of theirs. So this is now something that he has to get involved in. The only question to me is whether or not he should have specifically tried to notify Stannis that Arnulf was betraying him. That is where it gets really gray line to me, and I think that he probably should not have done that. But I also hate Arnulf Karstark, so I'm like, yeah, get him. Mm-hmm. But the other thing is that, like, I mean, I know John doesn't have like 2020 or like complete foresight, but he didn't even need to tell him because Tychos was going there anyway, so he would have been able to tell him. So it's like he sent a raven, which like sending the raven is the thing that he should not have done, but Stannis would have found out quickly anyway. So, yeah. But I don't know.
I did specifically like how George wrote that to where he went and met Karstark outside of it to make it clear that guest right did not apply here. So yeah. I thought that was very well written and very well received. Yeah, but I agree with Kyle here. I don't think the choice could have been made differently to completely stay out of it, and I don't think he specifically intended to get involved in any way further than to, keep the Night's Watch safe and that kind of stuff. So
and
I don't have any problem with what happened.
He's trying to like recruit Cregan to the Night's Watch and stuff too. So it's like he still has his best interests firmly affixed with the Night's Watch.
Yeah. What do you think, Joanna, about Jon Snow's arc?
No, I agree with what we've been saying. I thought it was very interesting to see him as a leader, because you see him in different situations in the previous books, and seeing him here, it's not what I had expected. As from what we see from him before, and also how he deals with certain people, like you were saying, like, oh, you're my friend, go away, like that kind of stuff. But I mean, I just liked seeing how he would evolve and how. How he tries to apply the things he's learned, but he also tries to be his own person, So yeah, I really like seeing that in this book.
Also, him beheading Jano Slint, 10 out of 10, one of my favorite chapters. I love that chapter so much. Yeah.
I think he's concerned about nepotism and the assumption that he's going to, raise up the people that have got him there and stuff.
But he literally did, though. He made Dolorous Ed and Iron Emmett like leaders of a castle.
I mean, Dolorous Ed is just. How much power does that dude wield? He's just there for comedy relief. I don't know that.
Second in command.
Know that raising him up makes that big of a difference, but I'm happy when he's on the page because there's a lot of sarcasm.
I love him.
That's all right.
Yeah. I feel like leadership is so complicated. It's so
Yeah.
not easy when it
Mhm.
comes to this series, especially looking at the theme of honor.
Mm.
And I feel like it was interesting because I was noticing early on in the book, like in the first, the very beginning, actually, he there's a line here. It says, "Lonely and lovely and lethal." Jon Snow reflected, and I might have had her. He's talking about Val,
Mhm.
her and Winterfell and my lord father's name. Instead, he had chosen a black cloak and a wall of ice. Instead, he had chosen honor, a
Mhm.
bastard's sort of honor. And I feel like that question just, I don't know, it makes you wonder, is honor honorable? And how much of it is serving your own ego in a way? Like, oh, well, I was honorable, you know, I'm safe
Mhm.
because I was honorable. That means I was good.
Mhm.
Versus doing what's right in the long term for more people.
Mhm.
I don't know.
Some of
So
that obviously goes back to Ned and Game of Thrones. So
Yeah.
there's a
yes, it
lot of echoes of
does.
that.
Mm-hmm.
So
It does, and it's interesting how both Rob in A Storm of Swords and John here, they both are trying I mean, they learned so much about leadership from their father, and
Yeah.
they try to go by that as their code, and it doesn't really, I don't know. I don't know how far it gets them. It
Yeah.
didn't work out for Ned,
I
obviously,
don't know if it's
and
like if it's like I did it so I'm honorable kind of thing. Like I think a lot of times in like societies that really value honor, it's it's so important to who you are as a person and how you see yourself that like it's part of yourself, like your self lens, but also like your self esteem and stuff like it's really hard if you think about it, that if everything in your life has always told you have to be honorable, you have to do this thing, this thing, this thing in order to be seen as a person in good standing, then you don't do that thing, then like you're not just going to be like, oh, well, I guess I wasn't honorable, like I'm going to go eat a sandwich. Like no, like it's a very like traumatic thing that like now you're not living up to the what your
Mhm.
society expects of you, so now you don't really have like a place, or like you feel like an imposter, or there's a lot of subtle things that go on with like why somebody feels the need to be honorable, that I think that um because we don't really live in an honor-based society anymore, at least in the West, that like we kind of just gloss over, but it's like, yeah, but our cultural values aren't the same. So
Mm.
Yeah, but I feel like the series, especially looking at Jamie's arc, it's like there has to be limits. There has to be limits to how far, the code of honor is gonna go in certain situations and what you're
of
going
course.
to allow as the result of doing the honorable thing. So, yeah, it's a really complicated question. I feel like George doesn't give you a really easy answer to that question.
No, he
But
doesn't.
you're
And that's
I
like
right.
don't
You're right
the
that
the one
I
thing
don't
that
think I'd like
Jamie
the books
says.
as much if he did.
Yeah.
no, I wouldn't either. Yeah.
And it's interesting because in the very first book, when he arrives at the wall and he gets bullied by his leaders and stuff, you see that, that thing where when you are not in leadership in a leadership position, you think I would do so much better than these people. And then he's in this leadership position and you see the results of what's happening. And
Yeah.
I think that's super interesting.
Yeah.
Always easy to criticize, not always easy
Exactly.
to sit in the seat.
Exactly.
Yeah. So,
Do we think Alistair Thorne and Tywin are gonna come back? Or we think they're dead?
I hope Thorne comes back. He's always kind of prickly, and it's fun to have him on the page.
I
Literally.
feel like him dying off screen or off page is not gonna be a thing.
It wouldn't be satisfying to me.
I'd be
I'm
really
hopeful
mad
that he
if
comes
Tywin
back.
dies off page. I'd be like, dude, Tywin's my dude with his wooden teeth.
Tywin's never made that big of an impression on me, but he's all right. He's a good dude.
His teeth are always click clacking, bro.
That's true.
He
They are
knows what he's
click-clacking.
talking about out there.
goodness.
Fair enough.
All right. Next character we want to talk about. I guess we can go to Danny. I kind of feel like I settled some general points about Danny already, but anything anybody wants to add to what you noticed in her storyline? Obviously, she takes on a marriage that she thinks is the right decision for her power and not marry the one that she wants to marry.
Mm.
It's just kind of questionable too. But
Well, I'm gonna help Scott out and solve the mystery for him. The green grace is the harpy, so you can just rest easy.
Mark
The
it down.
biggest question is figured out. I like a lot about Daenerys. I think her arc needed less chapters in this book. Like if there was somewhere I felt like could have been cut, I think it's partially because I knew going into the book that the initial very first Daenerys chapter that he had shared for the book is was the fighting pits.
Mhm.
And then he had to go back and add more. So it's like literally like Daenerys's last chapter in the book, or second to last chapter, was originally the first or second. And so it's like he added all of this extra stuff. So I knew that already. And so I was like, oh wow, he's added a bunch of stuff. So it felt repetitive and long. But I do like the main thrust of it. I do like the complications of how hard it is to lead Marine, and just how much it parallels with John, having a bunch of people that are like, no, like I don't want to listen to you. And they're like, you should listen to me because the way you've always done stuff is stupid. So like that parallel was fantastic.
I think also in the same line of what I was saying, sorry, with John, we see with Dany how sometimes it's easy to have ideals and say, I will abolish slavery, but you don't have anything in plan. And then when she's like, why are these people being slaves again? And like, no, they asked to be slaves again because it's better than what you gave them. And so I feel like like you were saying, Jonna, that we have a lot of parallels between John and Dany, for example. I feel like this is one of them. They both arrived in I think I might be frozen. No, we're good. Okay. They both arrived into a situation where they thought they had ideals and it would be so much easier and they could just do these things. And then they're both kind of like, how do you say that? They have to confront how, okay, maybe I had ideas, but not the best execution. And I had so much to learn. And I was a bit naive about my way of thinking about certain situations, which you see with her and all the slaves and everything and things that are happening in Marine, and that it's really not that easy. And I really like seeing that as well from her perspective, as well as from John's, of course.
Yeah.
The Dany chapters are not my favorite, as I mentioned, but she does one thing in the book that I love, which is she inadvertently saves Tyrion's life. So everything else is absolved and everything is fine. So
she does.
They were gonna sick the lions on Tyrion and Penny, and she didn't allow it. So that makes me very, very happy.
Penny.
I feel we'll get to Penny. I mean, that was one thing that I found satisfying watching the show, even though I love these later books so much more than later seasons in the show, as most people. But I did appreciate in the show that Tyrion and Dany intersected. It was very satisfying, given that was what I wanted so badly when I read this book the first time. I wanted them to intersect so badly. And I feel like a lot of her chapters do explore the complexity of leadership, as we talked about. It gives you a broader view of what's happening in that part of the world, not only in Marine, but in Astapor, and even just views in, I think, like, is it Volantis, where we get some views of her as well. So we get a lot going on there. And she's also an important perspective because we have so many characters who are, at least in the initial parts of the book, trying to get to her. Not only obviously Tyrion, but the Golden Company and young Griff. And then we have the Martell storyline there. So it seems like, and then Jorah's trying to get to her too. Everybody's trying to get to Dany. And so she's kind of like the prized bride in a way, the prized queen. And it's almost like a countdown. Can any of them get there before she gets married to this trash guy?
I don't know how much like you guys are aware of what the Myronese knot is, but just for anybody who's watching or in here that doesn't know, the Myronese knot was something that George responded as when he was writing the book a lot. He's like, I'm having a lot of trouble with the Myronese knot, like blah, 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 blah. And then he's like, I finally figured it out. And what it was is the order of which all of these people were going to get to Dany, because the order that they get to her changes the entire story. So it would be like, is Quentin going to get there before she's married, or no, he can't do that because then Dany's going to have to like accept or something. So then, or it's like, well, when's Victarion going to get there? Like, when's Tyrion going to get there? So he had to like, he would do like 100-page cycles and then realize that that's not the way he wanted the story to go. So he'd have to throw it out. And then he said the Myronese knot was solved. And I have suspicions it's not, but at least that was a large part of why the book took so long, is that he was really trying to hammer out that specific plot line and what order everybody came in.
And the assumption is that Daniel Abraham helped him solve a good majority of it.
Because Daniel Abraham is the man.
Nice. That's interesting. No, I didn't know that. I don't know a lot of the details surrounding this series. I have not even checked out Reddit or any of the websites or any of the interviews. But
You're better off. You can go down some real loopholes. It
Yeah.
can
Yes.
it can
did
I
read-
like
take up
I
all
love
your
learning.
life. It's not good.
I love learning from you two, though. I love learning from you three. If you have anything you want to share,
My least favorite theory of stuff that happens in this book is that Quentin is not dead. I hate this theory with like literally my whole heart. Anytime I hear somebody be like, Quentin's obviously not dead, they switched his body out for another burned body. I was like, that man was on fire
no,
from a
he's
dragon.
dead.
He's dead.
I
He's
haven't
dead.
actually heard that theory, but yeah.
Oh, it's
we
a
just
very
got that
popular
out
one.
of hand.
I really
Oh,
don't
I'm
like
sure.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, I
That would
wouldn't
be
like that either.
almost as bad as Ned not being dead. That would be bad. That would be bad. Dead is dead, and it's part of what
What is
makes
dead may never
those.
die. Sorry.
Oh, dang it. But I do have to say, though, like those last few chapters, I mean, especially the first time I read the books, like, I'm sorry, Joanna, I'm spoiling this.
That's
I don't
fine.
want to spoil it. I
Go
don't wanna
for
spoil
it. Go for it. You're fine.
She's good.
I
She's
probably
good.
have already heard a video about it or read an article about
I
it.
already
so-
spoiled that Quentin's on fire. So
Yeah, you haven't gotten to that, have you?
I'm literally
Uh,
when he's going down. So
Yeah,
It's fine.
it's
Go for it.
so well. I just have to say that like that was part of why, as a first time reader and the show not being done yet, I think maybe season one might have been out when I read the books. I can't remember if it was before then
Mhm.
or right after then, but I had no idea. I thought that for sure Dany was going to die in her last chapter, without a doubt. And I think it's because
Really?
the chapter, yeah, I was convinced. I was so scared. I was on the edge of my seat. But here's the thing, unlike you, I didn't know that John, I didn't even think about the fact that John didn't die. Like to me, it was a done deal. John was dead, and then Quentin was dead. So it just felt like, okay, it's coming.
I mean,
Their
I
death.
think
That's
I do
coming
think
3.
when the book first came out, there was a larger portion of people who just assumed John was dead. Like obviously we have the show
yeah.
and like that whole thing, and people have thought about it more. They've chewed over the prologue, the Melisandre chapter, they've reread.
Mhm.
But I'm just always thinking of narrative arcs, and like if it's a new author, like and I've never tried an author, and they just randomly kill off a character that's really important, I might just be like, this author doesn't know character arcs. But I know that George R. R. Martin does not know character arcs. So I'm like, oh, he's
Right.
not killing John in the 5th book. We spent 5 books. Like that's just not. And so people trying to equate it to like shocking deaths with like Ned dying or something, or like Rob dying. Well, Rob was a side character, and
Mhm.
Ned was like a prologue death that just got a really long introduction. Like, so it just felt different to me immediately. I was like, there's literally no way he's dead. So I
Mhm.
understand like just being caught up in the moment and being like, wow, like, but it's just not how my brain works.
Oh,
I
no,
still
yeah, I
think
totally
he
believe
is
he
dead
was
and will
dead. I'm
return.
a gullible reader, though, and I did not think about character or narrative arcs back then. I was still very new to adult fantasy.
So yeah.
So I wasn't closely reading the books by any means. So yeah, I believed it, and I didn't think Dany was safe. I didn't think for a second
Mm.
she was safe,
I
and
think
it
that's a
made
better
me.
way of reading. I wish that
Yeah.
I was like that. I just want to be like, what? John's dead?
It still feels,
Unbelievable.
even upon reread though, that
Shocked.
chapter still felt like a punch to the gut.
Oh
I
yeah.
Yeah, it
still
always
felt for
does.
him.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
I
always just
still
sad.
felt it.
I really like John.
No, yeah, I believed it, but especially like I said, I think part of what made it believable was 1, believing John was dead, and then 2, Quentin dying. Like that was
Yeah.
a for sure death. And, you know, I don't know that we got a full character arc with his character, honestly. But
With Quentin?
yeah.
Okay, so a lot of people that I've come across really hate on A Dance with Dragons because of Quentin chapters. So I'm here to lay down the definitive defense of Quentin Martell in this story. Okay.
Oh, I'm
Can't
not
wait.
saying he's a bad chapter.
No,
I
I
don't
know.
think it's
This
a
is
bad
for
character.
anybody watching who thinks this. So, okay.
Yeah.
Quentin Martell has 3 chapters. That is not that much. He's like in 40 pages of like his perspective of this whole book, maybe 50. And then he's only in a couple other scenes. But what he does in those couple chapters is very economic. Like I don't think like people are like, "Oh, I kind of think this guy's like a dork." And I'm like, "He is a dork." But he sets up you get so much information about the state of Astapor and the Myronese and the Yunkai from him. You get all of the stuff with the Tattered Prince, which is clearly going to be important because the book ends on a big cliffhanger of him joining and like rescuing the captives and everything. He wants Pentos, but Illyrio is in Pentos, and Illyrio is like the person that's on Dany's side theoretically. So something has to happen there. So you get all this background information on the Tattered Prince. You understand how Astapor is going and how people view Daenerys from the outside.
Mhm.
Plus, you get more information about how Doran feels about the whole situation. And beyond that, the character of Quentin is not supposed to be a main character. Like he's a side character, but we needed his perspective to understand. If he just showed up and then got killed 20 pages later, it would feel really weird. So we needed all of that background to A, feel invested in him trying to get the dragons, and then B, when he actually dies, we feel that. And so I feel like people just really latch on to, they're like, oh, Quentin showed up and then he just died and it was a waste of time. I'm like, it wasn't a waste of time. That is going to totally change Doran's plans. His plans for like 20 years were one thing, and then Viserys died, and then his plan is now this, and now it's changed again at a time in which John Connington has come to Westeros, and he has to make a decision to join John Connington. So it's like all of these ripple effects from everything that happens, and that's what George is so great at, is that every single thing that happens has a big ramification. And I think because we haven't gotten the next book, people are like, oh, it doesn't matter. I'm like, of course it does. It always matters.
Yeah.
So there's my defense of Quentin Martell.
Always
But he is a
stakes, always
dork.
consequences.
Absolutely a dork.
It was pretty presumptuous. Pretty presumptuous of Doran to believe that the marriage pact could just be flipped.
Absolutely.
Cool. That doesn't apply anymore. We'll just flip them. It's fine.
Yeah.
No big deal.
But to be fair, it would have totally. It just happened to be that everything was slow and they took so long getting there. If he had shown up when they were in Astapor, or even right when they got to Meereen, or could you imagine if Quentin showed up when they were in Karth? And I know they wouldn't know why Dany was in Karth at the time, but let's just say they did, and he showed up then. Dany would immediately say yes. She would sail right back to Westeros, and she would have Doran on her side. Like, it would be a totally different story.
Yeah.
And maybe she could keep Dario to warm her bed too. So you never know. Maybe Quentin would allow it.
Oh, Dario sucks. Man, talk about. I dislike Dario way more than Quentin because he's the worst.
Dario and his golden tooth and his blue hair,
blue forked beard, and
yeah. I do think though that the world building is next level in this book. So yeah, I think that every character that we're exploring in this series, especially outside, well, even with the wall, but even outside the wall, I would say, is really giving you a broader perspective of the world and the history, and you get so much insight about Volantis and the Doom, so many aspects of the world that I think are introduced, and it really, I think that those chapters are important. I do think that it's hard for people when I hear people say that they don't add to the story or that this should have been trimmed. I'm like, you don't know where it's going though. For all you know, all this is setting up stuff too. But I liked it. I mean, I personally liked all the perspectives.
I think you get so much like little nuggets of history or little nuggets of like into people's minds. Like, I don't know, they talk a lot about like Egg and how his kids and like how people, like some of those kings married for love, and how that's like, that was terrible.
Oh, Barristan the Bold.
You know, and
so transition
with
to him.
I love, because we had a chapter from him. I think it's the last one I read. So not the last one, but the last one I read. That was where he was thinking about Rhaegar. And he was thinking about all those people who married for love and everything. And this whole series, you've heard Rhaegar kidnapped Lyanna and he raped her. And then you arrive at this chapter and he said, oh, but Rhaegar loved Lady Lyanna. And you're like, this is, I feel like, I mean, if you've seen the show and stuff, like it's a first hint of something like, well, if he loved her, he wouldn't do what.
I felt that way earlier. This is the more evidence for me, not the first inkling.
No, but I mean,
pretty much confirmed.
It is, but I think that this is like, for someone who knew him so well to hear this, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, you know, because you hear like Roberts in the beginning is like, I will kill him for what he did, you know, and he's so mad, and then you see like, oh well, you didn't have that perspective though. You just think this is what happened. So
from Robert's perspective, what he did could have been just keeping Lyanna away from Robert. So
I don't think Robert
been enough.
thought too deeply.
Yeah, that's true.
About it. He was just
no,
like,
but I don't know. I liked getting all those little perspectives of things.
Absolutely,
of
I love that. And Barristan wasn't meant to be. It's so funny because now that I'm on rereads and stuff, I'm always like thinking about his process while he's writing it. And I don't know what it is, but it's still fun to like, you know. So Barristan wasn't going to be a POV. He was added very late. I actually remember reading the post where he announced that Barristan was going to be a POV. So when you read that without context, Barristan has so much information that we really desperately want. Like if Barristan just sat down and just talked or thought to us, we would have so many answers. And he's like, oh man, I have to make Barristan a POV because Daenerys leaves and I need to be able to see what's happening in Meereen while she's gone.
Right.
But he's trying to withhold that information, and he does some sneaky sneaks. Like he's just like, would a Shara Dane have turned to Stark? And I'm like, you son of a bitch, George. You son of a bitch. Because does that mean Brandon Stark or does that mean Ned Stark? And that's exactly what he wants us to be thinking. And like just all the little things, like everything he gives you in those Barristan chapters are just
amazing.
so the littlest amount possible. But it's so tantalizing.
Yeah, I agree with that. I thought that scene I had re-listened to also 2 or 3 times. I was like, okay. Like, and all these things. Oh, when he gives you the thing of like the tourney that Rhaegar organized, and Aerys was like, he hadn't left the castle in so many days or weeks or whatever, and he thought that this was a plot from Rhaegar to turn the lords against him and stuff. And like these are little things you get from him, and you're like, you have so much knowledge, just tell us everything you know.
Yeah.
We're supposed to get the end of that plot thread at the end of Dunk and Egg.
I was
believe.
just gonna say, I was like, man, reading those chapters, I was like, give me Dunk and Egg. That's all I want.
I just don't know what happened at Summerhall. That's you know.
That's what we're supposed. That's
the last Dunk and Egg.
Where it's
Dunk
and Egg is going to.
I don't think we'll get, but
no, we will never.
I am always hopeful, and it never works out for me. But I'm always.
I think we'll get more Dunk and Egg. I just don't think we'll get Summerhall. He wants to write 12 of them. He's at 3. Like the math doesn't hold out.
Yeah,
just skip a bunch, George. Just do Summerhall and then work backwards.
Speed it up, George.
One thing that I found really interesting about Barristan's chapters, though, is hearing his recollection of what it was like to be under Aerys' rule. And it felt to me almost like a flip of Jaime's situation. It's like if Jaime had been honorable, this is kind of like what Barristan lived through. I think it was a little harder for Jaime is the impression I get, but for Barristan, I thought that was really interesting about how he had this like different, and I think the way his chapters were written were compelling in that way because you get the sense that he had different choices with how he handled things, and yet he chose to save Aerys, he chose to help him out, and he's questioning whether he shouldn't have. And then this is right before he's deciding whether he should save I can't remember his name. However you say it. Thank you. However you say his name.
I know that one. Hizdahr Zolorak. Yeah, I know that one. He tried to make that one almost pronounceable.
Yeah. Well,
give me Shay Pate's name. Somebody say Shay Pate's name. Skaza Hord.
Mo I don't know. I cannot say these names. That was a challenge reading this book. I will not lie. But it's just interesting because he's given this choice, or he's recalling this choice and how he chose what he thought was honorable, but maybe that wasn't the right decision. Obviously it wasn't for his situation, because then he ended up under Joffrey, who ended up kicking him to the curb, right? So this is his choice now. Am I serving the queen? And is by serving the queen, am I loyal to her king? Or do I call him out? Do I question him? So I think
pound for pound, Barristan's chapters are my favorite in this book because we get so much. Barristan feels exactly how Barristan should feel, which like as soon as you get him, you're like, absolutely, let's go. And like his fight with Kraz is just magnificent in the fact that there's so much characterization working in that fight, and that's why Martin's fights are so good to me, because it's never about the fight. It's not like, wouldn't it be nice to have a cool sword fight here? It's that this is all about Barristan. And like, he's not trying to kill this pit fighter. And he's like, this guy's really honorable. I don't want to have to kill him. But like, he's so confident that he's going to win. And this guy's like a feared, crazy pit fighter that's 40 years younger than him. And he's like, this coward's going to kill you, sir. And he's like, it's not too late. And I'm just like, dude, I love that. And then like when he's talking about when they pull out Grolio's head, and then he's like, he stops and he thinks about how every king he's ever served would handle this. And he's like, even Jaehaerys, who was like not very, people thought was weak-willed, would at least arrest these guys. And Hizdahr just like does nothing. And I'm just like, man, this, I just love it all so much.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I love it. Making his little trail of knights. He's got like 12 little kid knights that he's making. That stuff's all great.
He like, okay, we all know like an old person that like just like he really is into like no, listen to where I'm going with this. So we all know like just like an old guy that just like they have, like, I'm thinking of like Lester Freeman from The Wire or something. They just like their little like figurines, or they like working with their tools or something, and they take a lot of pride in it. And that that
Mhm.
is him with his knights. And like when he's
That's
gonna
right.
when he's gonna knight them, but then he's like, well, hold on, I might be dishonored, and then they'll be dishonored. And I'm like, Barristan, you little grandfather, you.
He's such a cutie.
Aw,
He's the best.
he is. I enjoyed those chapters quite a bit. So who else should we talk about now? Maybe Tyrion from here?
Oh yeah, we can.
Isn't this your favorite character, Scott? Maybe I should let you begin.
He is. I have a tough time with some of the earlier Tyrion stuff where he's just looking for his favorite women and so forth.
Where
I
did the
don't.
whores go?
Yeah, I don't
Wherever the
love a lot
whores
of
go.
that. I don't love that he's constantly drunk and that kind of stuff. But he is still quirky and he is still very quotable throughout, so that's all good. I do really like the relationship that he builds with Penny,
Yeah.
and I thought that was somewhat heartwarming. And I like seeing him and the bear or I guess Jorah, on the same page and fighting amongst each other. So the Tyrion stuff is of the Tyrion chapters in the series my least favorite, but again, I still like an awful lot of it. And I think he's going to be right at home with the Golden Company and this kind of stuff. He's going to find his way. So when he's dipping his pen and he's putting everything in red ink, and probably something that is only relevant to me and nobody else here on the stream, he plays a lot of Syvass, which is the chess of A Song of Ice and Fire, and that's my game. So I love all the Syvass stuff. I think all that stuff's wonderful. So there's enough there to keep me going. I didn't even mention Tyrion when I first made my initial impressions, which was an oversight. But yeah, him being my favorite character is not due to this book. I'll say it that way. It's due to earlier stuff in the series.
One of my favorite moments with Tyrion in this book is when he's with Septa Lemore, which, by the way, the first time I read this book, I kept on thinking, is Septa Lemore, is she somebody's mother? Because they talk about her stretch marks. And they
I
talk
think
about
there's something going on there for sure.
Yeah, I kept on
It's a-
having conspiracy theories about her.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love the particular part where he's making up this history as YOLO. I think that was, or whatever fake name he has and fake identity. And I can't remember what she asks him, but it's something like he gives some kind of stories like, the mummers taught me. My mother loved me best of all her children because I was so small. She nursed me at her breast till I was 7. That made my brothers jealous. So they stuffed me in a sack and sold me to a mummer's trope. And then he just comes up with this whole fabricated story. And it's so fun. Oh, it was tumbling. That was what it was. And he's like, and then in his mind, he's like, the truth was different. His uncle had taught him a bit of tumbling when he was 6 or 7. And then his dad gets mad at him for that. And then the line she says, I love this. I'm sorry, I'm sharing it. But she says, I hear that you have a gift for making men smile. And you should thank the Father above. He gives gifts to all his children. He does, he agreed pleasantly. And then in his mind, and when I die, please let them bury me with a crossbow so I could thank the Father above for his gifts the same way I thanked the Father below.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
love that.
He
Died
has a
over
lot of good
that.
stuff like that. Like he's like, I'm killer with a crossbow. You can almost hear him just stopping Deadpool style and turning to the audience and being like,
Yeah, totally. Yes. I loved that. Even though it was really tragic, like you said, Scott, like how drunk he was and how self-loathing he was. And when he kept saying at first, like wherever the whores go, I'm going wherever the whores go. Show me where the whores go. At first, it comes across like, wow, you just have like no shred of humanity left. You're just lost. You're just done. But then you get the impression later on that he's actually looking for his former wife, that maybe that's why he's looking
Yeah.
at. And then it's really sad.
It's a
all
big
over
world.
again.
He's not going to find her. So
No.
well, there's a pretty good theory about where she is. Do you guys want me to say it?
Mhm.
Go for it.
She's almost, well, I shouldn't say almost certainly, but there's very good evidence that she's the sailor's wife in Bravos.
yeah, I've heard, yeah.
That Arya is talking about when she's like out and about as cat of the Cannels. I don't remember all the evidence for it, but basically she's like a prostitute that only deals with like like rich men, like courtesan, and like
Yep.
she like arrived in Bravos one day and had like a lot of money, and then like just like I can't remember all the details too, but when I read it all, I was like, sounds legit. And she has like an affinity for like blonde men or something like. I don't remember. Oh, she has like a blonde daughter. Maybe that's what it is. But when if you look it up, it has a lot of
Likes
legs.
dwarves with 2 different colored eyes. She's got some interesting taste.
Yeah.
I'm kidding. I'm just kidding. No, I've heard that too. That would make a lot of sense because that's the only prostitute that we know a fair bit about from the story. So it would make sense.
George is really good at like making the world feel so big, but then like when people show up again, that it doesn't feel like there's a lot of minor characters that show back up, like when Biter and Roars are at the inn, like the chances of that, but like, you know, it's, you already know how big the world is and you know they're like in the Riverland, so you're like, yeah, okay. And like I would be surprised if we don't get an idea of where Taisha went by the end of the series.
Yeah.
We might Tyrion and her might not get reunited. I think that's maybe too happy, but I do think we as the readers will at least have a strong hint of what happened to her. That's my bet.
He's in addition to being drunk all the time, which is, you know, somewhat par for the course, he's also fairly suicidal at parts in this story, which is also not my favorite side of Tyrion. So it's tough seeing him go through some of this.
And also the thing he says about what he wants to do to Cersei when he sees her again, I'm like, oh, lovely. Yeah. Great. Okay.
I don't think he means that. I think he's just lashing out. But yeah, it's dark stuff to.
It is dark stuff, but I do think it was super emotional when, in one of the last chapters, he says like that he just wants to find Taisha again. And he doesn't say her name, but he's like, I just want to find my wife or something. Or then he says, or my other wife, like when he's talking about Sansa, and it's just like it's so sad in this. You know, like you get it. You have not been like you've been drunk this whole book. You've been doing all these things, but sometimes like, okay, yeah.
And the other moment, I think it was when he was surviving the fighter's pit, or I'm not sure if it was that scene, but he also mentioned that he found himself, when thinking that his death was imminent, that he was thinking about Jaime. And it made me think, he really does love Jaime still.
Yeah, he does.
Was totally betrayed.
Was anybody else bummed out that he didn't get to see Drogon? He's been thinking about dragons and reading about them his whole life. And then they're asking him about, did you see the dragon? And he didn't see it. So
no,
for whatever reason that bummed me out.
Because we had to see that from Daenerys' perspective. Like, so if we saw the chapter from Tyrion's perspective, we wouldn't know why, like, that he had been in danger. Like, we needed to see the whole thing from Dany's perspective, but then we wouldn't see Tyrion's first reaction to a dragon. So I think he purposefully had to miss it so that later on when he sees a dragon, we're in Tyrion's perspective.
No, I think that's fair. I just hope we get there.
For sure,
I want that to happen. So.
Oh, that was a beautiful scene too, or sad scene too. Like that was right around the scene where they see the Palace of Love or something that used to be grand and beautiful and is now more tragic, more empty and hollow. And then there are the grayscale men around the Bridge of Dreams. Really interesting world building there. Yeah. And I would say that is the cool thing about this book is that I over and over again hear people talk about the series as a whole based on the first book and say that like it's very low magic or low fantasy. And I'm like, you get magic off the charts in A Dance with Dragons. You know what I mean?
There's so much magic in the series. It's just all coming back. I feel like the last 2 books, if and when we get them, are going to be very magical.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, I get that sense. I mean, book 1 does feel more historical. I could see how people read it that way, but you're right. Like it's there, but then it really comes to the surface, I think, or you really see it full scale. No pun intended with grayscale, but you really see it come to life in this particular book.
The dragons are back. The magic is back. I definitely think the two are intertwined.
Also, while we're on Tyrion, I don't like Penny at all.
I was about to ask.
I just don't. I understand her role in the story. I get it. I understand. I hate her so much.
Why?
I don't like anything about her. I don't like that she exists. I don't like that she exists so much. I don't like that she exists in every Tyrion chapter. Mostly, I want her to not be there. I am not charitable about this at all. I don't like it. She's so stupid. She's so stupid. And I get it. I know all the defenses. I know the defenses that she's a sheltered person who was told by her parents a way to keep her alive and not deal with too much bigotry. I understand she's just a naive little girl. I hate it. I don't like it at all. I'm just like, will you stop asking dumb questions?
I think she's not my favorite, but I think we needed her there for Tyrion.
It helps Tyrion, yeah. I know. It helps him. It helps rein him in. I know.
Yeah, it brings back his humanity.
I think she's gonna die in like 2 chapters anyway, so I think she's got the mare.
I actually expected her to die before the book was over the first time I read it. I didn't
Yeah, me
expect her to
too.
make
But
it.
there's no ending
So.
to the book, Scott. So that's why.
I love the
Penny.
epilogue of the book. I think it's
Oh, the epilogue is
fantastic
great. But literally, he skips like 10 chapters to get to the pink letter. Oh, we didn't talk about the pink letter in John's perspective, which is very important.
Go ahead.
The pink letter is crazy. And but by pink letter, I mean the letter that allegedly Ramsay Bolton sends. And it's chock filled with crazy shit.
Yeah.
And so clearly, like, so what ended up happening when he was writing the book is he was going to have the Battle of Ice and the Battle of Fire at the end. And then he was just taking a long time. And so his editor was like, you really got to speed up this process, George. And she lobbied for one of the battles to get taken out of the book. So I hate her for my whole life. So she bothered him until he took out one whole battle sequence. And then he was still having trouble finishing on time. So he willingly took out the other battle sequence, which means that both of the climaxes of this book are not in this book, which is ludicrous. Number one, but he still wanted the ending to have John dying. So he skipped the battle with Stannis and Asha and all of them. But then he just moved time along to get to the last John's chapter. So technically, when we start with Stannis' stuff, like you see in the Theon sample chapter, like that stuff is all happening before the last John chapter. So we're filling in what's going on. And there's no way everything in that letter is true. But it's there to get John to be motivated to then like get stabbed. So I'm just like, what the hell is going on with this letter? There's lots of theories about this letter. I've heard everything.
There are a lot of
I've heard
theories,
that Mance Rayder secretly sent it in an effort to get John to leave. I've heard that Theon somehow sent it, which is just crazy. I don't know why anyone would think that. So there's a popular theory that it's actually Roose Bolton sending it, which again, I don't think. But there's a lot of questions around what's going on with that letter. And I'm just mostly mad that battle was skipped.
So I'm dumb. So why do we think Ramsay didn't write it?
So there's
Sorry,
good.
I'm calling myself dumb because I
don't think that's dumb. Like
Ramsay wrote it.
so, the one thing is that it's the way it's written is so aggressive. Like I haven't looked into these theories for a while because I don't like them. But I think for the record that Ramsay wrote it. I'm just saying that there is question as to whether he's telling the truth or whether he wrote it. But the way that it's written is so clearly meant to provoke a reaction of like John leaving that it's questionable what the motives of the person doing it is. And then you get the Stannis chapter, or the Theon chapter, where Stannis is saying to Justin Massey, this is not in the book. This is the book, the chapter that was included as a bonus when you bought the hardcover of Dance with Dragons. He tells Justin Massey that if you hear rumors of me dying, like, don't believe them. Like, go.
Wait, is this Theon's chapter? Is that a bonus? Which bonus chapter?
Yeah, it's a Theon bonus chapter.
I remember.
Yeah, he sends Justin Massey to go to Bravos to recruit sellswords, and he's like, if you hear over there that I died, don't believe it. Just come back, and like give the sellswords to Marine. So he to Shireen. So he's already planning on like people maybe hearing that he's dying, and like whenever people talk about like in that chapter things going wrong, like battling, he's like, oh, I have it all in hand. And Stannis is like a really good military commander. So just the idea that there's 7 days of battle and he loses and dies, and then like Ramsay gets his sword just seems unlikely. But then the question is, how does Ramsay know some of that stuff? Like something has to be going on with Mance Rayder. Like for him to know Mance, there has to be that he actually caught Mance. Unless Mance is the one sending the letter, which I don't think. And he knows about the sword. So is it that maybe Stannis tells him about the sword in some sort of like pitched battle situation, and then when Ramsay's having some last desperate thinking, he like mentions the sword? Like we just don't really know what's going on with it.
That's fascinating. I remember seeing that chapter because I checked out a hardback library copy when I first read it. And I didn't read that chapter though, because I was like, no, I want to wait until it was all put together. And then I kind of regretted it later on. I thought, I kind of wonder what was in that chapter. But that's interesting. That is so interesting.
I agree. I do think that Ramsay would write like a letter like that, and I do think that he's bluffing. I just think that it's just very suspicious letter. Like I don't know. Like,
There's so much that's suspicious in this book. And by the way, when we talked about Barristan, I totally forgot to mention this, that there is a hint there about how, well, it says that the Ares had Joanna Lannister to himself right after Joanna and Tywin were wed. And so
Again, worded very vaguely so as to make us
wonder if possibly Jaime and Cersei are Targaryen or half Targaryen.
There's evidence that
Plenty of
all
theories.
3 of Tyrion's kids are Targaryens. I don't know how I feel about that. Like, I agree the evidence is there for all of them, so it could go either way. I really like the irony of like Tywin not thinking Tyrion was his son, but then actually Tyrion was his only actual son. Like, I really like that.
That would be cool.
But a lot of people think that Tyrion is actually going to be the one that's half Targaryen. And I don't know how I feel about that, but
that's the one I've always sort of subscribed to, at least mildly.
I get why. Like, the dragon has 3 heads. He's clearly one of the main 3 characters. He has an affinity for dragons. Like, it all makes sense. I just he has 2 miscolored eyes. Like, you know.
And what do you all think about the young Griff? Do you think he's really
Blackfire? 100%.
It's what?
He's a Blackfire. I'm the most sure of anything that's a theory that he's a Blackfire.
A bastard Targaryen versus a real Targaryen.
Yeah. So do you want me to lay out what a Blackfire is?
Yes.
Okay. No,
Yes,
no
please.
worries. I don't like to assume people don't know what I'm talking about. So, okay. So
No,
the
please go ahead.
Blackfires are, especially in the 5th book, and on a reread, when you're paying attention to it, the amount he talks about the Blackfires more in the 5th book is just absurd. Which they are a series of rebellions started by Daemon Blackfire. There was Aegon the Fourth, which is the one that was before Duncan Aegon, and he on his deathbed did a terrible, terrible thing, which is he legitimized all his bastards, and he gave one of his bastards, his favorite bastard, Daemon, his sword Blackfire, which is the Targaryen heir sword that they've always given to the kings, and then he gave him that. So then Daemon renamed himself Daemon Blackfire, and he wanted to be king. And then there was the actual heir. And then it became this whole war, the Blackfire Rebellion, and it tore sides apart. And they switched the banner; they inversed the colors for the Blackfires. And then so Daemon Blackfire was killed, but he had like 7 sons or something like that. And then all this stuff happened with like multiple rebellions over time. It was all this like stuff going. And then so the people who founded the Golden Company is Aegor Rivers, who was one of the bastards that was legitimized. So he would have been Daemon's brother. And when Daemon died, he went over to Essos and founded the Golden Company. So at the time in which we are at in the story, the Blackfire line is extinct in the male line. But we never get confirmation that they're dead in the female line. And Illyrio is really weird about the way that Aegon is, or he's weird about his wife Sierra, and she has like blonde hair, and he's really sad when she died, he has a weird interest in Aegon, and then the prophecy in the House of the Dragon has the Mummer's dragon, so then it's like not, like it's a fake dragon kind of deal. And then Varys also in the end, when he shoots Kevin, is weirdly invested in this. He's from Pentos. Why is he so invested in all of this stuff with like a random Targaryen heir? There's just a lot of suspicious stuff about him being a Blackfire.
Fascinating.
And that was me trying to be short. There's a lot more information. So
I love it.
That's great. There's just so much to the series, man.
In the first book, not the first book, the 3rd book, when Robb tells Catelyn he wants to legitimize Jon, she sort of hints at or talks about this whole thing and says it ripped the whole place asunder the last time something like this happened. Legitimizing bastards is not that's not what you should be doing. So
and if you read the Duncan Egg novellas, which I highly recommend anyone do,
they are good.
They are about some of the subsequent Blackfire rebellions. Not the original one that happens before Aegon is born, but there's a lot of good information about them there too.
Yeah.
I haven't read them yet, and I haven't read Fire and Blood yet, so I have a lot of reading to do. And I'm sure that this upon reread, after reading those, probably unlocks a lot more.
It'd be so good, yeah.
We saw another Targaryen bastard earlier in the series, right? that Arya runs into in, I think, A Storm of Swords.
Who
Wasn't
are we
there?
talking about? Are you talking about Ned Dane?
Maybe that was it. Mhm.
Yeah, he's from Starfall. Like he's Arthur Dane's nephew. That's the only one I'm thinking, unless I'm forgetting who you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense.
But he has purple eyes, so maybe that's why you're thinking about it, because they're the only other people that have purple eyes, is the Danes.
So do you think, by the way, do you think John Connington knows about all this? I mean, he's doing this.
No, I think he's doing it to honor Rhaegar's son. I think, like John Connington's not going to know a baby from another baby. Like the theory is that the baby, he thinks the baby was switched, but the baby wasn't actually switched. They just then brought in who they already like had ready as a Blackfire heir, which like the theory being that it's like Illyrio's kid or like something like that. So
That's
lots of
wild.
interesting stuff there.
Would look enough like a Targaryen that nobody would.
Yeah, because they technically are Targaryens. They're just, you know, they would have been interbred, or like not interbred. They would have bred out their Targaryenness more than like the actual Targaryens at this point, but they're still, you know, Targaryens.
Yeah. But wait, would this kid not have been around when Dany was with Illyrio?
But we don't know. He would have been with John Connington at the time, because he's clearly been with John Connington for a long time.
Yeah,
and John, I don't think it's questionable at all. John definitely believes it's Rhaegar's son.
Too,
yeah.
And they talked about his upbringing, Little Griff, and about how he'd lived in poverty and he'd lived in all these different things. So I'm sure he's been all over the map doing all kinds of different stuff.
And then the other thing, I was going to mention it and I just got distracted in all my talking, is that the reason the Gold Company, so the Golden Company is known for not breaking contracts. Like every time they mention through the series, they're talked about as reliable and dependable, and they don't break contracts. And they broke a contract immediately for a random pact that their previous sire signed 15 years ago on paper with a guy who's also dead, and they just break off what they're doing, no questions asked. And the only thing that makes sense they would do that is because Aegor Rivers was a Blackfire, so like they have natural ties to being Blackfire loyalists, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. So this is a question I have that I was wondering. So clearly this was not in the show, right? Like they didn't add.
No, they totally cut out all the Blackfire stuff. Yeah.
So where do we think it's going now in the books? Because in the books, sorry, because we didn't have this in the show. So I'm always interested in seeing, like, so it's so different, this part. And I actually loved that about this book, that there was a lot of stuff that wasn't included in the show. But now it makes me think like, oh, where are we going to go? So
it could go so many places. My personal theory that I really like is that actually Aegon is the one who burns King's Landing, but maybe Daenerys is the one who gets blamed for it or something like that. But the honest thing is we just don't have really good guesses. Like they exercised everything from the plot line. It's not like they changed it. So who knows? And that's why when people think that the ending is going to be the same, I'm like, are you kidding?
Can't be.
There's so many things that aren't in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I could see it ending with Bran on the throne, but there's going to be a lot more
I agree.
setup and payoff for that.
And I also wanted to ask theories about, so I really enjoyed Davos's storyline in this book, and was curious about where you all think his storyline is going, because he seemed to be pretty freaked out about where he's being sent to find Rickon.
It's confirmed he's going to Skagos, which is a big island that people don't go to, that has unicorns and cannibals, or alleged cannibals. People don't actually go there very often, so they don't know. But that's why he's really scared to go there. And then, like, if you on Reread, when you know where he's going, if you listen to, I think it's Ghost, but it could be, it has to be Ghost. John has visions of where the other direwolves are when he's dreaming through Ghost, and he sees like Shaggy Dog fighting a unicorn. And like he obviously doesn't use the term fighting a unicorn, but like once you know, and like the unicorns are like shaggy and like so like they're different, but that's what Shaggy Dog is, fighting a unicorn, when it's after Rickon goes to like leaves with Osha. So
that's interesting. So we have to talk about Theon. Like we have to talk about Theon.
Yeah.
So where do we want to begin when it comes to Theon? I love what you were saying at the beginning, Joanna, about noticing the name change in his chapters. I like how George does that in general.
Yeah, it's amazing. And for a
especially
character
with
where
his
in the
arc.
beginning you hate him, you know, in the first couple books, you're like, what an idiot. And then you get to this and you're like, oh. So
Man, he's
Yeah, it's
so
rough.
he's so good at making you care about the characters. And I think it was so hard because I think what was hard for me to read was every time something, let's say positive or slightly positive happened, he was like, no, this is a trap. If I do this, he's
Mhm.
going to cut off another finger. Or this woman
Excellent.
is surely another trap from Rams. And it's just like, he's so traumatized. So
Mhm.
traumatized.
Yeah.
The
And
Stockholm
yet,
syndrome is cranked up to 1,000.
oh,
It's really, really rough. Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
so crazy. And yet he finds it's when they're leaving, right? I think, or correct me if I'm wrong, but when they're leaving, I think at some point he's like, well, what if this was another trap? And he's like, well, it's too late. Now I cannot go back. So I just got to move forward and do this. And that moment was like, yes, it's so strong for him to be able to, because you saw how traumatized he was. You saw how he was thinking. And yet in that moment to be thinking, oh crap, this might be a trap and he will come and he will hurt me for it. And he says, it's too late. I'm going to go. And he does it. And even the moment when he sees Arya and he's like, that's not Arya. Don't they see her eyes? They're the wrong colored eyes. Like how is everyone being so blind? And you hear his inner monologue, and yet you see that he's like suppressing it and be like, no. And I don't know, his chapters to me, I think they were some of my favorites to read just because of that. And then the ending of them, I'm like, yes.
I
Yeah,
loved
it
those
made me very
chapters.
emotional when he remembers his name. I'm just like,
Yeah.
oh man. And like when he's
Yeah.
telling Jean, like you have to remember your name, and I'm like, oh
Yeah.
man, yeah, just brutal. Most of my favorite stuff in the Theon stuff is once again stuff that's not fully like it's background stuff, which is the Great Northern Conspiracy, baby. Oh man, Frey pies.
Yeah.
Did you guys catch Frey pies? I know Scott knows what I'm talking about.
I
No.
have no
Okay,
idea.
you guys don't know. Okay, great. This is one of my favorite. I'm so glad I get to be the one to break Frey pies. to
Yay,
you guys.
thank
Okay,
you.
so Wyman Manderley is one of the biggest badasses in any series ever, and he gets like 6 pages of screen time. So,
Yeah.
okay, so there's 3 Freys that go to White Harbor. It's like Rhaegar, Jared, and Simon or something. And so there's guest right. And like, you know, the Freys broke guest right, and everybody's mad at them. And so when they leave, and like Wyman says to, you know, Davos, the North remembers. I'm like, oh, great line. This mummer's farce is almost over. And so when they leave, he does a very public guest gift in front of everybody to give them 3 horses. And he's like, you are no longer my guests. I'll see you at Winterfell. They go missing. They're never seen from again, those 3. Hosteen and Annie's Frey and Winterfell are so mad at Wyman that they're missing. And that's what causes all the frictions inside Winterfell. But the crazy thing is when they have a feast, Wyman fucking brings 3 giant pies. And he brings giant pies, and he's eating multiple things, and he's so giddy eating these big pies, and he calls for people to sing about the rat cook. And that's what really gives it away, because when Bran is talking about the rat cook, it was somebody who had fed the king his own son in a pie.
Yep.
And so he's like, bring me more pie. Like, let's hear a song about the rat cook.
I did catch that. Yes.
So he fed the phrase to the phrase. And I just think that is the most wonderful thing of all time.
Yes. I did make that connection because that's the story or the lore that connects to guest rights and why guest rights are going to make you cursed. What do you all think about the guest rights thing? Do you think the guest rights are real in A Song of Ice and Fire? Like that the curse is real? Or do you think it's something that the people
it's just cultural. I don't think it's real.
Yeah.
The phrase reap what they sow. Like they're just dropping like flies, which is so fun. But that's because they did something that everybody hated. And so people don't like them. Like if you think about modern day, if somebody does something, you know, that people don't like, people don't deal like their business, they get cut from sponsorships and they get all these problems. So then they just So I just think it's like that, you know, it's just cultural.
Yeah, even their closest allies don't trust them, obviously, nor should they, all that kind of stuff. So that's all there. In terms of the Theon chapters, what I like the most is when Roose Bolton is on the page, because no matter how dastardly Ramsay is, Roose is 10 times as terrifying to me.
Roose is way scarier.
Every time that dude is on the page, I like, oh man, like
He's scary.
This is the embodiment of evil right here. This dude. So we get a lot of his stuff in there, which I really like. And it's soul crushing that he's almost kind to Reek/Theon amidst all of this. This dude that I'm terrified by is almost kind to this dude.
Yeah, it's scary.
It's chilling. All that stuff is chilling to me. I love it.
I think people overvalue Ramsay's importance to the story, and I think one of that is to the pink letter, and obviously like we're in Theon's head, and so Theon is really scared of Ramsay. And then the show then made it where like Ramsay was just this huge villain, and we'll see when Winds of Winter comes out. But I think Roose is the bigger threat. I don't think Ramsay kills Roose in the books. I don't think that makes as much narrative sense for like how scary Roose is set up to be. And also, there's a line from Lady Dustin, who is also a really awesome minor character in the Grand Northern Conspiracy stuff. And she says, like, we're all just playthings to Roose. Like, he's just like a psychopath. He's a sociopath who, like, he just is mildly amused by all the things that we do. And, like, you can't really scare him or creep up on him or surprise him. He's just playing with us all. And to then, like, kill him a couple chapters later from Ramsay or something, just... I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think Roose is going to be the guy who's the final boss in the northern plot line because he's scary.
I do not like looking back at the show. I don't like how that storyline went at all.
Yeah.
And what they did with Sansa or any of that. It's just gross. It's yeah.
Absolutely. It doesn't make any sense and it's gross. So
it doesn't make any sense either. Yeah.
So real quick, the Grand Northern Conspiracy is that a bunch of the Northern Lords are fighting against the Boltons and the Freys secretly, and they're like in communication with each other. And there's a lot of little nuggets about this, but the bigger one is all the things Wyman Manderley does, but then also how like the two Umbers, like one of them joins each side, and then there's like rumors that, or there's not rumors, there's hints that they're still working together because they don't want to fight each other, and like one is gonna turn on the Boltons, and then there's also like people being killed inside Winterfell, and Lady Dustin is just hella sus. Like everything she does is just strange, and I just can't wait for them all to just rise up and fight the Boltons and the Freys, and I'm just like, yeah. And then also, so in Storm of Swords, we have Mage Mormont and we have Galbar Glover go into the swamps to find Howland Reed, and that's the last we ever hear from them. And we have somebody mention, we have Robec Glover show up in White Harbor, and he says, "Oh, like my brother Galbart is still like." So there's implications he's in contact with his brother, but it's not outright stated. But the last thing we know is that he went to go find Howland Reed. Howland Reed is the only guy who survived with Ned
Tower of Joy.
The South Tower of Joy, and like he's a really big Stark supporter. So Howland then has these moving castles in the bog, and then at the end of Clash for Kings, Catelyn sends Ned's bones north with Hal Molan, and Lady Dustin specifically mentions them in this book that she's looking for Ned's bones, and they haven't gotten through the swamps yet. So I think Mage Mormont, Galbar Glover, and Ned's bones are just chilling with Howland Reed in the swamps, and they're conducting this big like Northern conspiracy, and I'm just fully on board.
I'm here for it. Give me all of the Howland Reed POVs. I want everything to do with Howland Reed. Yeah.
That was the Manderleys have built a secret Northern fleet. The Umbers are playing ball because the Great John is still being captured in chains, which, by the way, the sigil for the Umbers is a giant breaking loose from chains, and the Great John is a giant currently in chains.
Big dude.
That's all I'm saying.
And we also have Horsebane Umber. What a wonderful name.
Horsebane.
Who doesn't love a good Horsebane Umber?
And Crow Food.
Crow Food is good too, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so as far as the Theon storyline though, I thought that it was pretty powerful. I really loved the wedding scene and just the way he's zooming in on the colors of how great everything is, and everything is wrong, or about what you were saying, Joanna, how he keeps zooming in on the wrong eye color. Nobody's noticing the wrong eye color.
Yeah.
Wow.
And what's his face? Ramsay makes him do and everything. It's just so.
I mean, that's great.
But also at the same time, I feel like the fact that Jane arrives there, it's almost like it ignited the spark that was needed for Theon to find himself, his way back to himself. Because I think he knows Ramsay, right? And he just knows what this poor girl's gonna go through if he doesn't do anything. And that I just thought was, after everything we think he's done well, we know he hasn't done, but what people think he's done to the Stark kids and everything, it's just like such a thing to say, okay, I remember her being Sansa's friend and everything. I'm going to do what needs to be done here and save this girl.
Mhm.
And I just thought that was really powerful.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah,
crazy
just
too.
like the visual of them like jumping off the wall together
Yeah.
and just like not knowing if they're even going to make it, but they're like, we're taking this leap of faith together. I just think
Yeah.
thematically is really great.
So good.
And isn't it also in his chapter? I think it's in his chapter. Again, correct me if I'm wrong. Where someone's like, "Oh, you know this place? How do we get to the crypts?"
Mhm.
And then he's like, "You can't go to the crypts." And then he says like, "Oh, Winterfell is full of ghosts." And he says, "Oh, they're my ghosts."
And I'm one of them. Yeah.
Yeah. And then they do go into the crypts, and then you see that some of the Starks don't have no swords anymore.
Mhm.
And I was like, well, okay.
Yeah, there's a suspicious number of those swords missing. I think there's some theories based around that, but I'm not too sure about them.
Yeah, and it was just, and I mean those crypts, right? There's a lot of stuff going on in those crypts. So I really loved seeing all of it. It was, I love his chapters. Like I said, I didn't expect to love them, and I just really, 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 really did.
It's so heartbreaking to see Winterfell the way it
Oh
is.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's so sad.
Lady Dunstan talking to him about how she both loves and hates the Starks also, and could never be one of them. All that stuff was really, really
Yeah.
good.
And like he finally admits in this book that he had a home. Like I can't remember. I think it's to Rose.
Yes.
Where he's like, "Oh, you were a captive." No, it's to Lady Dustin. She was like, "You were a captive," and he's like, "No, I had a home. Like it's
Yeah.
the most home I've ever had." And I was
Yeah.
just like, "Dude."
Yep.
Ugh.
Which is so powerful when you take into account how he used to say like, "I was only your captive," and blah blah blah, how he was at the beginning, and then now he's realized it, and it's just, yeah, I loved it.
Yeah. It's pretty amazing too, the way we get his storyline at the same time as Asha
Yeah.
is is going towards Winterfell as captive. So they're both captives. And
Yeah.
of course she has it a lot better in some ways, though it's really treacherous, that journey.
Yeah.
I was noticing a lot in this particular book the way that Martin uses repetition.
Mhm.
So in her particular chapter, I can't remember exactly what the line was, but it was some line reference to how far it was from Winterfell. And she's feeling every single step and she keeps repeating it almost like a mantra, just trying to put one foot in front of the other. And there was it's also kind of an interesting way to showcase the passage of time when all the markers that would show you in, like the sky or whatever aren't so clear or visible, especially with the blizzard going on. And I would say the same thing in Brand's chapters too. The passage of time is shown through more repetition of the moon in
Right.
his very strange and ethereal place where time just doesn't seem to be functioning the same in some ways. So I find that really interesting. But Asha's chapters were fascinating, and
Right.
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like a couple months ago, you were asking about, like unrelated to A Song of Ice and Fire. You had mentioned just like seasons and how they are in war and how they're necessary and like how you'd never really considered it. And like, a bunch of us were like, yeah, like here's the read. What I really wanted to say is just read A Dance with Dragons. Like
You could have
Asha's
just said it because
storyline.
I've read it before. It's just been a while.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Asha's storyline is exactly the kind of thing why you don't march in winter. Like it's just horrifying that they're just like when they're like the cold count reached 30 or whatever last night. I was like, Jesus, or it was 80 or something. It was insane. I was like, Jesus. And then like the cannibals and stuff. Oh, just
Yeah, it's so
horrifying.
fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think I was inspired by that because I was reading The Long Price Quartet by Daniel Abraham.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of talk about that, about an autumn war, and how, we can't do war right now because winter's coming. So it's interesting just to see that. And yeah, you definitely get the understanding about how war doesn't really work when there's a blizzard going on. But just it was so tragic too, or so sad, just seeing how these horses that were so helpful on their journey are dying and they're having to live off the horse meat
Yeah.
and people are resorting to cannibalism.
Also, we have Big Bucket Wool calling Ned the Ned, which is the coolest shit. He's like, we're gonna save the Ned's little girl. I'm like, damn right you are, man. And his like
man.
little
Those in the
his little
stories, I love all
speech.
those old books. They're all great.
Yeah. He pulls in that little speech of like how he wants to die saving like Ned's girl and stuff. And that's better than just like getting old. And I'm like, oh man, and I say this in every stream because I feel it so strongly. George writes minor characters better than anybody else alive. Like that character shows up for like 3 scenes, but every scene I'm like, man, this guy's cool.
Yeah.
That's right.
He does have
That's
a
100%
gift
right.
for side characters, for
Yeah.
characters in general. Totally agree. Yeah, I don't know. Also, just the intersection between Asha and Theon too. When she doesn't even recognize him. She's like, "Who's this old man?" And he is.
Is this Barristan the Bull?
Gosh. That's just crazy. It's just so sad.
It
Yeah.
is sad.
And it makes me so curious about what's going to happen next.
The stuff with Asha is super interesting in the sample chapter, because basically she goes to Stannis and asks for him to be not pardoned, to have a trial or something. I don't remember. It's been years since I've read that chapter, but the implication is that she had been talked to from Bran, because she goes to a weirwood tree or something like that, and the crows start talking all weird. I can't remember the details because I try not to reread the sample chapters too much because it makes me sad. But I was like, whatever's going on with Ash is wild. So
Interesting. Yeah, there was a scene, wasn't there, where Theon felt Bran's presence?
yeah,
in the weirwood?
it says Bran. The tree says Bran to him, and I'm like, oh man, we haven't had a Bran chapter in like 600 pages. Like, what's going on?
So, as far as Bran's chapters were concerned, I really enjoyed them in this book. They felt very different than all the other chapters. To me, it felt almost like a dark children's fairy tale, but in a dark fantasy world. I
Very
liked
Neil Gaiman.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good way to put it. That's perfect. Very Neil Gaiman-like. Yeah.
Yeah. I like seeing some of the memories that Ned had and that kind of stuff through Bran's own eyes. So, he's talking about, he hopes that, Catelyn can forgive and treat both boys the same. So talking about kind of John and Rob. And he's talking about kind of, and I don't know if this is from Ned's point of view or who, but it seems like Lyanna and Benjen are out playing in the yard just as it would have been, his. So all that stuff is super cool. I liked all of it.
We see young Nan most likely.
Yeah.
Oh, is that what that was?
Old Nan now,
there's
but
theory
young
that
Nan then.
it's young Nan and Dunk from Dunk and Egg. But
Dunk,
I mean,
yeah.
that's just baseless speculation, really.
It's speculation, but I think it's pretty much assumed. Yeah.
I know, but I want to say baseless so that they don't think it's canon. But I think it's what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, all that stuff was super, super good. I liked it all.
I love that section. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't feel like, let's see if I could bring it up in my notes so I can give it better attention, but I don't feel like something that I don't feel like in fantasy gets appreciated enough, and that George R. R. Martin does so well, is how he takes us from point A to point B, even just in a short distance. Like the way that he'll describe a setting and make the world come alive. Like he's a very immersive writer, and just the journey that Bran and Jorah and I'm blanking on the other name, not Jorah. The two other
the Reed kids,
the Reed kids. When they make that journey with Hodor.
Jojen and Mira, okay.
Thank you.
Mira, yeah.
I'm so bad with names. I'm sorry. But when they make that journey down towards the Green Seer, towards a three-eyed crowed man, it's beautifully written. Like it's it just becomes more earthly with the roots and with the skulls, which are like the children of the forest skulls. Then he talks about how like the skulls feel like they're watching him, and there are crows perched on them that feel like he's being watched. It just has this otherworldly, eerie magic. I love the Neil Gaiman description. I think that's just so perfect. The broken bones, loose dirt, and pebbles, a yawning chasm, and then there's this underground river. It just feels so dark but whimsical.
Yeah,
and
love it.
Yeah, I really love those descriptions. And then when he comes across the man in the Pale Lord in Ebon Finery, and he's in this like woven weirwood throne with withered limbs and clothes rotted on him, and he looks like a corpse, but there are like these roots that are growing through his body. It's fascinating. I think that's just incredible description there.
So, do you know who the three-eyed crow is, Joanna's? Like, do you know the backstory?
Yeah. No.
Okay,
I don't think so.
He's Bloodraven, and he was well known for having the phrase "a thousand eyes in one," which is what really gives it away. But Bloodraven was one of the brothers of Daemon Blackfyre that I was mentioning earlier, who was legitimized, but he did not join his brother. He actually hated his brother. And he fought with Aegor Rivers, the guy who founded Golden Company, over one of their half-sisters. So there's a whole big drama there, but he ended up staying loyal to the throne. So when the Blackfyre Rebellion was thwarted, he became Hand of the King. And because, I mean, in hindsight, we now know as the readers, he was like a green seer. So that's why he had such a good network of spies, but he was well known for being very, very good at knowing where everybody was and what everybody was doing. And they thought he was a sorcerer. And for unknown reasons, I don't think we know the reasons, he gets put into the Night's Watch. So he takes the black at some point, and then he becomes Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, and then he just disappears.
Right.
And then this is the next that we hear of him, is that now.
Well, they do make some hint about that the clothing he was wearing was black, and so you get the impression that he was on the Night's Watch. Was this information where was this information that you got? Like,
kind of all over the place. Like if you know what I just told you, then he's mentioned throughout all the books, but a lot of it is just like, I don't like the name Bryden Rivers is not said in any of the Bran chapters yet, but he talks about having a sister that he once loved and a brother he hated and all that stuff, which is dead on for Bloodraven. Bloodraven we know that he was the Lord Commander at some point. They say that in the books. And then the absolute telltale thing is that he says Bloodraven's line, which is like 1,000 eyes and one. So.
Oh, wow.
And he only had like one eye. That's why he says 1,000 eyes and one. Mm-hmm. And then the Raven also only has one eye.
Yeah. Really curious about where that's going to go.
Dean, I didn't know that, so thanks for telling me. I've probably learned it at some point, but that's totally not in my memory.
Which part? This part here?
That he killed a Blackfyre pretender after granting him safe passage. I do remember that Egg gave him 200 men to join the Watch, though.
Was that in somewhere in the Song of Ice and Fire too? Goodness.
I think that's in the World of Ice and Fire. Like, we've only gotten tidbits about that because we have Fire and Blood goes up to a certain point, and then we have Dunk and Egg. There's just a little bit here, and then we have the current timeline. So there's like huge gaps in what we know.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's World of Ice and Fire.
World of Ice and Fire? Okay.
Yeah.
Which is an encyclopedia, not written by George, but written by people that have helped George.
Fascinating. Okay, yeah, getting some confirmation about that too. Arya. We haven't talked about Arya, by the way.
You know what? Arya is one of my favorite characters, and I always forget she's in this book because I don't really like her chapters that much. Like, I don't think they're bad. I just think they should have been in A Feast for Crows. Like, I don't think they add value to this book, and her storyline ends on such a strange, bizarre cliffhanger in Feast for Crows that whenever I'm reading them, I'm like, why wasn't this in Feast for Crows? So but they're still excellently written chapters, and I love the little pieces of Bravos you get in all of her chapters and stuff. So,
how unsettling is that when she's getting her face actually changed? Is it just me, or is that just the craziest stuff ever?
It's so creepy.
Gross.
Yeah.
So gross.
It is gross.
Yeah, very gross.
But cool. Gross and cool. So
that was the exact moment that I was like, people call this low fantasy.
It's not low fantasy at all, especially at this point. My goodness. Yeah, I'm really curious where her storyline's going. I really don't have a lot to say about her. I wish
there was so little too.
I'd have to go back and like reread her chapters to really dig, but
it was just a check-in. And so I'm like, why couldn't we have gotten a Samwell Tarly check-in, George? It's been 18 years since we've had a Sam chapter. 18.
Let me know what Sam's doing over there. I want to know.
You're like that from Titan. It's been 84 years, but it's actually been 18 years.
It has been 18. Yeah, it's absurd.
I really liked in the beginning of this book, at least my copy had like a little forward, and it said like, oh, I'm so sorry. I know I took some time to write this book. I'm like, foreshadowing.
Oh no. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Is there any character that we haven't talked about? I'm sure there are.
Yeah. I want to talk about Victarion briefly, but yes, this is actually the first live stream I've done in my house. My wife is over here organizing while I'm just talking to you guys. So
All right, let's talk about Victorian. Go ahead.
Victorian's hilarious. The funniest character in this entire series, bar none. He is the dumbest human being in a position of power I've ever seen, but like in the best way. Like I say this so endearingly. This guy's terrifying because he's too dumb. Like when he's just like these monkeys, like everything with the monkeys kills me. And then when the best line I think of this entire book is when somebody's like, she's across the Dothraki Sea, and he's like, tell me where the Dothraki Sea is, and I shall sail it. And the guy's like, ha ha,
It's
you're
grass.
a fool. It's grass. And he just
And he
chokes
feels
the
like
guy
an
to
idiot.
death because he's so embarrassed. Oh
Yeah.
my god.
I love
That
that.
is funny.
Yeah.
Victorian is really interesting because he's so clearly a pawn of Euron to the point where like something I think is going on with the Dusky Woman that is gonna have some relevance, and then you have Makoro doing like R'hllor magic on him, and he so clearly thinks that he's in charge of his own destiny and that he has his own plan, and it's just not going to go well for him.
No.
And combining all that with the fact that like on the face of it he's this Viking badass, I'm pretty interested to see where he goes. He should have been played by Ray Stevenson. Absolutely, I totally agree.
Yeah. What is the name of the priest again? The Makoro? Is that his name?
Makoro, yeah.
Makoro. So I don't remember what I searched for. I searched up some name or something when I was looking up something for this book, and I saw like some things pop up, and I didn't look it up, but I just saw some like Reddit thread lines that said theories on who Makoro is, or which there's probably a theory about who every single character is.
Yeah, Makoro's probably Makoro, but in Quaith's vision, she says something about like, I can't remember the exact wording now, but there's something that hints that she's Makoro is part of the prophecy that Quaith gives her, but I can't remember the exact terminology yet.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's wild.
Yeah. Crazy parts of the book.
I think we've talked about pretty much everyone besides Jaime and Cersei.
Oh, Jaime and Cersei.
Those are pretty big
about
ones.
them.
Yeah. Well, they just pop in for a second, Like,
Yeah.
Yes, I'm trying to remember where Jaime's chapters end. Is that when he intersects with
Brienne?
Brienne?
Brienne
First,
just
I
shows
need
up
to
and
leave
says a bunch
you.
of lies.
So I will just let you go because I have to. It's like 10 p.m. and I have to have dinner still, and I wake up
Oh,
at
no.
5:30.
Okay.
So I will leave
So good
you.
to see you, Joanna.
It was
Yeah,
so
see
good
you
to
later.
see you, and I will rewatch this part
And then
tomorrow
comment about your last thoughts.
We'll do
Yeah.
when I finish the 7%.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
All right.
See you later.
See you later. All right.
Yeah,
So what do we want to say about Jaime? Because Jaime, he doesn't heed Cersei's call, but he goes with
So-
Brienne.
I think this might be my favorite chapter in the book because
I love it,
it's
yeah.
got we learn a lot about the Brackens and the Blackwoods.
I
and their
love
whole
that
feud
stuff.
deal.
Hatfields
I
and
love-
McCoys.
Yeah, the Hatfields and McCoys of Song of Ice and Fire. I love all of it.
Yeah.
So all that stuff is super cool. We've got the two feuding fathers, and trying to get one to agree to stuff, and this kind of so all that just getting people together. And Jaime has, and he started to show it in Feast for Crows. He has negotiating skills I would not have assumed. I'll say that from him. He has this ability to bring out enough from people in these negotiations, which I really, really like. And then, Brienne being just, I'm fine. I've got some bites, but I'm cool. Let's go on an adventure now. That I remember reading that the first time, and I'm like, oh, okay, so she's fine, because we didn't know if she was fine at the end of A Feast for Crows.
I know. I remember being shocked when we saw her in this particular book. Yeah.
I hate how that chapter ends because it's a tease.
Yeah, I don't
I'm just
love
like,
it,
dude.
yeah.
Why did you these are all the things that frustrate me about this series. Is I'm just like, bro, you're just cliffhangering and then giving me 10 years.
He does do good
Like,
cliffhangers,
can
though.
you just cliffhanger and give me 5 years? Like, can we just compromise? Like, he's so interested in not spoiling anything about the upcoming books. But I'm just like, bro, just give me a hint where Jaime and Brienne are going. Just talk about it a little in an interview. It's been like 15 years now. Can I just get a little hint? And it just, but yeah, I mean, actually, like within the chapter, I agree everything with Scott with what he's saying. Jaime's my favorite character in the series, maybe my favorite character ever.
Yes,
I
me
love
too.
him realizing that he is a better negotiator, and like he doesn't just like the TV show does this all the time with characters, which is that like people like have progressed and then now they're not like the same character at all. Real people backslide. So Jamie is a really good negotiator, but then at the very end, he's like, I will send you your son's head. And then like, Titus Blackwood is like, he gets colder and he's like, oh, I remember who I'm dealing with. Don't worry. But like, if he didn't need to say that threat was unsaid.
Right.
But he lapses back into old Jamie. That's like, I need to let people know that I'm actually an asshole. But I'm like, you didn't need to, Jamie. You were good. You were in the clear. You did everything you needed to do.
Everybody understands what a hostage is. Nobody needs to be informed.
So, it's just things like that make people seem so real. And I like him getting the histories of the Blackfires and the Brackens from Hoster Tully and like Hoster Blackwood. And this kid just gangly. I just imagine him being like 7 foot, like Alex Tall Guy Reads, just being like, call me Alex.
No.
And he's just like, I'm not your friend, buddy.
I love that line. Yeah.
It is cool that the kid talks about how there have been so many times where they were able to work out their differences and they had marriage pacts and all this kind of stuff. But it always goes back to
and actually
goes back to violence.
We get a lot of Blackfire stuff in that chapter because
I didn't make the connection till now. Yeah, I remember that now.
But they're talking about like it's like Barbara and Missy's teats or whatever, and like how Damon Blackfire was going between them. So that's or not Damon Blackfire, Aegon was going between them, and like one of them is Damon's mother. I can't remember which one though.
Yeah, that was fun. That was a fun time. Enjoyed those chapters too. We didn't get as much Jamie as I'd hoped. I think in this.
I know, very sad.
Would have wanted more. That's for sure.
Yeah, but Cersei's arc was pretty wild, and we didn't even get a lot of Cersei chapters either.
Nope.
And they didn't come in till like the second half, but they were still pretty powerful.
Seeing her just humbled at the end there, like
the walk of shame.
The walk of shame is so good.
That part's good, but just how docile and stuff she is after that when she's supping with her uncle and stuff.
No, I don't know what's going on.
There could be a game going on there, but
I don't think so. I think she really is. Well, I mean,
she's for sure changed. I mean, again,
she's not changed, but I think she's really humbled in that walk. At least there. Yeah. I don't think it's like a permanent change. But
I think she will be different in Winds of Winter. I don't think she'll like the show again. I don't like to harp. We're talking about the books, but they did that thing, and she was like broken down, and then she just went right back to being evil Cersei. Like the next episode, I'm like, this was a traumatic experience for her. Yeah. It's going to change who she is. I don't think she's suddenly going to be like a hero of the story. Like she's still going to be a villain, but I just think it will impact the way she interacts with people and stuff. And like, it'll be really interesting to see. That chapter though, with the walk, every time I read it, I'm like, this is one of the best chapters I've ever read. And it's because I hate Cersei with my whole heart, but I cannot read that chapter without being like, oh, poor Cersei. Like this is just brutal, like just extremely well done.
Oh, I love her. I felt for her. It's so, oh man, I'm trying to think of all the details about it because first of all, she tries really hard to hold herself up and to walk with dignity and not shiver because it's really cold out there. And then after a while, she starts tripping and then people are throwing poop at her and all kinds of nasty stuff. And she like keeps injuring her knee over and over again. Obviously, her hair is all cut off at this point. Makes me wonder about the hair thing too. I noticed there's a parallel there between Cersei's hair being cut off and in the books, but not in the show. Daenerys's hair gets burned off when she's with her dragons.
Jamie shaves his head at one point too.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Earlier on, bald is beautiful. No, I think that stuff's all good.
Well said.
But also we get the echo back of when Kevin is thinking through and he's thinking about what Tywin did to their father's mistress. And it was the same type of deal, the same type of walk of shame. And I believe that we had that earlier in the series from a different point of view, that was how the mistress was treated and the shame and that kind of stuff. But it was more, I guess, vivid or tied to thematically better for me on this reread with this chapter.
Yeah, me too. I kind of forgotten that actually until I read that chapter. I was like, oh yeah, that is like A weird parallel. Also, when I saw Kevin's name in the epilogue, I was crestfallen. He is the only person in any of these epilogues or prologues that I cared was going to die. I was like, no,
Yeah.
not Kevin.
I really like
Not
Kevin.
I actually really
Lannister.
like Kevin.
I
Kevin's
do
pretty
too.
cool.
He's just like
Yeah.
the able dude. And like he just, he just does what people tell him. He's competent. He doesn't overextend himself. He's not mean to people. He's courteous. He's smart. And that's literally why he gets killed. Like Varys is like, you're just doing too good of a job, man. Like I gotta rein in the chaos a little.
When you're trying to bring in a new regime, he's exactly the guy you want to take out. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Wow. That was a wild epilogue. And seeing Varys come back. Of course he was going to come back. I thought that was a good ending in some ways.
And we got the White Raven. So
yeah, when I say I don't like the ending, like I don't mean like literally. I just mean like the climax of the book.
Yeah, I know what you mean too. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and then winter has finally come. We are in winter.
So good.
Dang.
And Pycelle's gone.
I mean,
poor old Pycelle. I don't care at all.
Pycelle.
Some losses are bigger than others. That one I would not put among the ones that are big losses.
I wouldn't put him as a big one.
Dean out here being all moral and stuff. Let me like Kevin, Dean. Like Kevin's just doing what his older brother wants him to do. It's all fine and dandy.
Really?
Kevin,
you hate Kevin?
Kevin hates you too, Dean.
I thought Kevin was an interesting character.
Yeah, I mean that's fair. Like if I examine most of these characters through like, are they good people? Like it's pretty much a no across the board. Maybe Davos, maybe.
There was a moment where I think Davos is wonderful. I love Davos. I think Davos actually is a good character. I know he has like he obviously has his
he was a smuggler, but like smuggling is just like, trying to make a living. Like I'm not that.
Yeah.
We also have his infidelities with his wife, which he admits to, and other he's
there's
not a perfect person.
Not a perfect person.
I love him, but he's definitely not a perfect person.
Yeah. Well, he's not a perfect person, but I think for the most part, he does try really hard. I don't know. I feel like people are more inclined to trust him. Is the sense I get too. What was I going to say about Kevin? I was going to say something about him. Oh yeah, I had a moment in the epilogue, and this could have just been poor reading, but I almost got creeped out for a second, wondering if he was like interested in Cersei in a sexual way.
I did not get that.
Yeah,
I didn't get that, but it wouldn't shock me given given what happens in that family. So you never know.
Yeah. Well, there was a moment where I questioned it, and I was like, no, I could see how that's not the case, but then I could also see how it would be. It could be.
I think he was just like ambiguous, talking about how I think I even remember the line you're thinking about, but I can't remember exactly what it is.
It was something about like. Sorry, go ahead.
I think it was more just like he was just kind of trying to think about how others. Oh, it was like how she's young and like how they don't see her like because she's been naked in front of them. And so he's talking about how like they see her different because she's naked. So I think he was trying in that moment to just think like how other people view her. And it just kind of sounded weird because he's her uncle. I remember thinking it was a weird line, but I didn't get that vibe from it.
At one point he said something about she was a beautiful woman in the prime of her life and that kind of stuff. But I didn't get anything sexual out of that. Maybe there was something there, but
I don't know what it was. I'd have to look it up.
This series just changed you, Joanna. Like you're just seeing things in shadows now.
It'll do that to you, won't it? Well, obviously there was a lot that I didn't see. I mean, there's a lot of things. This particular series is fascinating because it's written in such an accessible writing style. And at the same time, he is so good at hiding details in plain sight.
Did you
like no other author I know?
The Hooded Man in Winterfell? We didn't talk about that.
No, we didn't. Go ahead.
So when all those people are getting killed and Theon's like wandering around, there's a guy in a hood in Winterfell, and he comes across Theon, and the implication is that he's going to kill Theon because he's like calls him Theon Turncloak, and he's like, oh, like you killed the boys, or whatever, and then he's like, oh, I don't remember the exact way the conversation goes, but we don't know who this guy is. He's just a random guy with a hood wandering through Winterfell, and then Theon's like, oh no, like I'm Ramses to deal with, and then the guy laughs. He's like, well, then I guess I'll leave you to him, and he takes his hand off of his sword and walks away, and we don't know who that guy is, and there's a lot of theories about who that guy is because. In the context of reading it, you might think he's the person killing everybody, but then you have the spear wives,
washer women, right?
Yeah, the spear wives admit to killing everybody except Big Walder, And Big Walder's heavily inferred to be killed by Wyman Manderley because mayhaps it's a blessing. If he lived, he might have grown up to be a Frey, which is incredible.
Right.
So then, in that point, you're like, okay, so he's probably not the guy doing the murder. So who's this random dude just hanging out in Winterfell? Some people think he's the Blackfish, but I don't think that that's who he is.
I don't know that it would make sense that he would be there at this moment in time, but
Not really.
I do want to see where the Blackfish ends up because I
Yes.
do love his character.
I
hope
love
he's-
the Blackfish.
I hope he's in the prologue of Winds because not as the POV character, but Jane Westerling is confirmed to be in the prologue of Winds.
Oh yeah,
and that super fascinates me because she's currently being taken to Casterly Rock, and she's being escorted. And the Brotherhood with Banners is doing some shady stuff right now. And Blackfish escaped, so I'm wondering if like they're gonna like mount a rescue or something.
Wow. Oh, that's wild. That's really interesting to think about.
as always, you just make me want Winds even more. I didn't know it was possible, but
I know.
I
It makes me
know.
sad. Every time I finish these books, I'm like, no, why did I do this to myself?
So do you all think that there's any other fantasy series out there that has more conspiracy theories than A Song of Ice and Fire?
No, but part of it is because it's not finished.
I know that, but
Yeah.
that has a lot to do with it. I remember when I was reading it and I found all the fan sites and that kind of stuff, and I was amazed that there were so many people coming up with theories and all this kind of stuff. I just had never been a part of something like that. So
I've seen theories. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, yeah, but I'm good. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I've seen like a dissertation on Reddit of somebody analyzing every dress that Sansa has ever worn in the series. And it was like a lot. Like it was a whole literal essay and how they think that that's foreshadowing and thematic stuff for where her story is going to go. And I'm like, we've been waiting too long for this book. This is the exact moment we have dipped into insanity.
Yeah, people are working too hard at that point. That's not it.
I agree. That's a whole other level of conspiracy building for a series. But yeah, this was just absolutely brilliant. I really enjoy this series so much. I feel like every single chapter can almost function like a short story. It feels almost like you're reading a series of short stories, which in a way kind of made the reading process take a little bit longer for me because I think you did mention, Kyle, obviously about the cliffhangers. I mean, he does write some of the best cliffhangers I've ever read, but they're cliffhangers that you're not going to get resolved until either the next book or until several chapters later. So then when you start the next chapter, it's kind of like you're starting all over again. So for that reason, it did take me a while to read this book, but I still just appreciate so much of what he does. There's so much detail that's there.
Yeah. And I think the hard part is like out of the way. Like, he took away the 5-year gap and then he struggled really hard. And like clearly he's struggling with wins, but I just think that's a lot of death by 1,000 cuts kind of things that's probably dealing with that. I don't think based on how he's talked about it, it's specifically like wins is difficult to write because he can't figure out where it's going. I like it feels a lot like he gets distracted and then there's a problem and then he rewrites and he's a perfectionist, all that kind of stuff. But it feels like Feast and Dance were the real thorn in his side of like getting people where they need to be. So wins should just be some crazy stuff happening because everything is set up in every single plot line to just be wild. And so I'm really just
well,
give me
it's
that
going to
book.
be battle. It'll be battle heavy, and he's already said he doesn't love writing battles, so that's probably part of his challenge.
I think some of the battles are already written though because they were at the beginning, but I'm sure that's slowed him down.
Maybe they'll be rewritten and rewritten again. As George does.
That's another reason why I don't want to read the sample chapters too much is that like I was burned by reading the sample chapters before Dance came out, and I was like, oh, these chapters are way different now. And
yeah, that's why I didn't read them.
I don't want to get married to the idea of like, oh, this is what happens in this Theon chapter, and then I read it and I'm like, no, it's different.
I've read just about everything Song of Ice and Fire, and I've steered clear of the sample chapters. I don't.
You haven't read them at all.
Chapters. I haven't read them at all.
Read them.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. I am curious though. I do think though that, like I said, even just in a micro sense, one thing I again appreciate about his writing is he really takes his time and details getting from point A to point B. I think with a lot of modern readers these days are a little impatient with that kind of process. But I think that's also why it's probably going to take a long time with these books, is that he's not going to just rush things or make things come out of nowhere, not like the show did. So I really think that he probably puts a lot of time and attention about how we're going to get to where we're getting to.
Absolutely.
I've waited this long. I could wait some more.
I agree with
Patience is
Dean though. The Forsaken is one of his best chapters. It's very good. But yeah, I get it. Now you've already waited 12 years, so you might as well keep it going.
No, I have heard that about that chapter.
Yeah.
I've always steered clear of them because it'll just make me want it more, which is not
Yeah,
ideal.
for sure.
So
Yeah.
hey, I need to get going here pretty soon. Are we pretty wrapped
I think
up?
we're
or do
pretty
you have
much
other
done
things?
here. I think we've covered a lot. I'm sure there's a lot more that we didn't cover, but this was good for our general final discussion on A Song of Ice and Fire. So I want to thank you both so much for joining us.
Yeah.
Big shout out and thank you to Joanna Sousa, who left a little bit
Yeah.
earlier. And yeah, thank you guys. If you guys hopefully come back to BookTube, I'd be happy to see it. But otherwise, I'm so grateful I brought you out of retirement for this discussion.
So great
thank
to
you
be
guys.
here.
Yeah.
Always a pleasure, Joanna. Kyle,
And these
good to
two
see
can
you as
also
always,
be
my friend.
found on
Yeah, you
various
too.
Discords as well. So, but I'll have their channel links down below as well. So,
Awesome. Thank you both. We'll talk soon.
Yeah.
thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Bye, everybody.